Chapter 2053. Evenly matched. Ji Wuming smiled arrogantly. Do I need to use a divided soul against you? These words were very haughty and very arrogant, but also very much like what Ji Wuming would say. As a reincarnated ninth heaven celestial king, he had the right, and should also be this domineering in character. Yet Ling Han gave an "oh" and said, "It is only your main body that has entered here, while your divided soul has gone somewhere else." Ji Wuming paused slightly. He had not expected Ling Han to be so sensitive. He nodded and said, "That's right. Now that I have a divided soul, I should do some more work, and obtain more fated opportunities." As expected of Ji Wuming, this kind of feeling surged up in Ling Han's heart. When the other party lacked a divided soul, he could still battle Ling Han to a stalemate. Even though he presently had the upper hand, that had been because he had caught Ji Wuming off guard. If he wanted to kill the other man, it would be extremely difficult. Of course, it would also be incredibly difficult for Ji Wuming to kill Ling Han. For those that had reached heights like they had, it was difficult to decide the victor, and even more difficult to kill their opponent. Die! Ji Wuming bore injuries, but he was also even more formidable than before. It was like the bloodshed had excited him, causing him to regain his fighting spirit. Boom! 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 The two absolute monarch tiers burst into a great battle. The character in Ji Wuming's eyes blazed brightly, boosting him with endless power, and made him incredibly terrifying. Ling Han did not show weakness, either. Since he had already used the great clash of source powers, he also used it repeatedly, exerting a great pressure on Ji Wuming. As expected, Ji Wuming was really a supreme prodigy, one who used to be a ninth heaven celestial king. Though the great clash of source powers could make Ji Wuming very wary, he had already found a way to deal with it, and that was using the regulations of space and time to distribute the impact. Before Celestial King tier, the regulations of space and time could overwhelm any single regulations of the 5 elements. Though Ling Han had made use of the resonance of the 4 source powers, he lacked one of the 5 elements, so the might was considerably weaker as well. In summary, this was still not enough to suppress Ji Wuming. Ling Han couldn't help but feel astonished. It should be known that Ji Wuming presently was still not in his prime state. He still had a divided soul that had yet to enter the battle. And even then, he could still battle Ling Han to a tie, which meant that the latter was still no match for Ji Wuming. A reincarnated ninth heaven celestial king was really too difficult to deal with, for he was overwhelmingly strong. This battle continued for 3 days and 3 nights. The two great monarch tiers used all methods they could, launching powerful moves with every movement. If it had been any other person, even if it was a heaven soul tier monarch tier, they would probably have been killed by now. The great clash of source powers, the severed passion sword, and so on were too frightening in their might. Both of them stopped at the same time, facing off against one another. If it was not because I have to kill you, I really would like to befriend you, Ji Wuming said smilingly, his fighting spirit still blazing hotly. You are indeed the strongest opponent I have faced. Ling Han nodded, showing an expression of respect. Aside from Ji Wuming, there had been no other person that could fill him with such a feeling of pressure. Furthermore, in a situation in which their cultivation levels were equal, Ji Wuming was the first opponent that Ling Han had not been able to defeat, and was the only one too. I cannot kill you this time. We will battle another day. Ji Wuming was also very decisive. He was going to get the 5th source power of heaven and earth as soon as possible, and it had to be earth element at that so that the great clash of source powers could unleash its strongest might. In this battle, my stamina was also very crucial. Ling Han did not continue his journey at the first moment, but rather summed up a conclusion from the previous battle. Perhaps Ji Wuming did not need it, because there were really too many prodigies he had fought, but Ling Han was different. It was the first time he had encountered as troublesome an opponent as Ji Wuming, and would need to ensure he attained perfection in all details. If I had stronger stamina, I would be able to attack faster. At first, I would be able to deliver 10,000 punches in a single breath, and in the future, it could be increased to 11,000, 12,000, or even 20,000 to 30,000. After 3 days, Ling Han finally stood up, and continued to advance. Soon, a streak of dragon's breath appeared ahead of him. It took human form, and its manifestation was not affected just because Ji Wuming had already passed this way once. Ling Han did not directly use the great clash of source powers, but rather used this opponent to enrich his own battle prowess. Previously, he had summarized what he had learnt for so long, so there should be a little improvement. However, with the prerequisite that he didn't use the great clash of source powers, he was still no match for this streak of dragon's breath. Still, compared to before, he had indeed achieved a certain degree of improvement. He should not waste any more time. Ling Han channeled the great clash of source powers. Boom! The wild waves of regulation surged out, and this streak of dragon's breath was instantly dispersed. I need even more dragon's breath. He barged his way through, searching for more dragon's breath. However, there seemed to be a rhythm here. After he had passed, there would not be new dragon's breath birthed on his path, no matter how many times he passed back and forth. Not only was it this case for dragon's breath, it was the same for the bloom of Tao. Ling Han did not believe that Ji Wuming would choose not to pluck any bloom of Tao if he had passed any. He cautiously used the regulations of space to split off the space that he was in as he retrieved this bloom of Tao. Ling Han gained an understanding. The dragon bridge was actually a kind of bestowal, but the prerequisite was you had to be able to retrieve it. 4 different dragon bridges, the strength of the dragon's breath should also be different, and there should not be any bloom of Tao on the other dragon bridges. At least Ling Han had not heard Fu Yu and the others say anything about it. Ling Han walked along the bridge. Unless he channeled the indestructible heaven scroll, his feet would still be pricked uncomfortably, so he wanted to stay longer on this bridge, and retrieve more dragon's breath and blooms of Tao, but at the same time he hoped to quickly reach the end so he would not need continue to endure this suffering. Whether he was willing or not, the dragon bridge had finally shown him its end 3 months later. Ling Han could see a gigantic dragon's head biting onto the other side of the cliff. Each of its dragon's whiskers fluttered elegantly, exuding a captivating air of dominance. In these 3 months, his cultivation level had already reached the peak stage of Yang Soul tier, and his stamina had also been increased to a terrifying extent, so he could wrestle with Heaven Soul tier. However, Celestials tended to contest in regulations, while origin power and stamina were only secondary, no matter how strong you were in these aspects. But stronger stamina meant that you would be able to move faster and last longer, so there was naturally only benefit and no disadvantage to possessing it. However, it was not everyone that was qualified to reach this place. The weak would be eliminated at the first instant. Ling Han sat as steady as a mountain, and there would occasionally be people coming off from the dragon bridge, passing him by. Some would stride past him, rushing on their way, while some would stop and look at him for a while, curious about why Ling Han was seated here. Ling Han. 2 days later, a delicate and charming young girl leaped down from the dragon's head, suddenly leaping into Ling Han's arms. Who else could it be but Hu Niu? The little girl clung to Ling Han's arms, her arms hooked around his neck. Did Ling Han miss Niu? Of course I did, Ling Han said smilingly. Let's leave quickly so we can take the chance to lose those 2 great witches. The little girl's eyes were wide, her face filled with anticipation. Chapter 2054. Plains. Ling Han couldn't help but feel speechless. This little girl was really the jealous type. Even after having spent so many years with the Empress and the others, she had not changed her original aspirations. Whenever she got the chance, she would want to monopolize him. Be good. He rubbed Hu Niu's head. Hu Niu pouted, appearing very unhappy. However, Ling Han soon made her smile again as she related her experiences on the Dragon Bridge. As expected, she had also encountered Dragon's Breath, but there were no blooms of Tao. Going by that reasoning, it was possible that there would be no Dragon's Breath on the normal bridges, or the Dragon's Breath would be pitifully weak. The 2 of them waited for a while, and then they saw the Empress step off the dragon's head with an incredibly graceful bearing. Her charms were incomparable, and could easily make anyone submit to her. Hu Niu, big witch. Hu Niu pouted her little mouth, appearing very displeased about seeing her. Another 2 days later, bewitching Maiden Ro also appeared. Ling Han looked at her, and the corner of his mouth involuntarily twitched. Bewitching Maiden Ro had not come alone, but was rather surrounded by at least a dozen men. Furthermore, every single one of the men had an ingratiating expression on his face, as if they wanted nothing more than to surrender their very souls for her. When she spotted Ling Han, bewitching Maiden Ro couldn't help but smile dazzlingly, a hint of pride curling up the corners of her lips. "See, what do you think of my charms?" "Let's go." Ling Han did not even give her any regard. His left arm wrapped around the Empress. His right held Hunyo's small hand, and he turned and left. "Wait for me." Bewitching Maiden Ro hurriedly leaped off the dragon's head, and chased after Ling Han, which made those over dozen men show expressions of jealousy and hatred. What right did he have? They had curried favor with her throughout the journey, and fought to step in front of her whenever there was danger. Meanwhile, Ling Han clearly did not do anything at all, yet their goddess still chased after him. How could they tolerate that? "Hold it right there." A young man leaped out, standing in the path of Ling Han and the others. Ling Han smiled slightly and said, "Step aside." "If you had the ability, how could I manage to block your way?" this man declared proudly. He was clearly provoking him. "Scram!" Hunyo ordered. Pang! She shot out a punch, and that man was instantly sent flying. In a mere instant, all that was left of him was a tiny black dot. "Do any of you still want to block the way?" The little girl swept a glance at those remaining, her eyes extremely fierce. Those remaining hurriedly shook their heads in unison. They all felt glad that they had not been that rash. Otherwise, they would have ended just like the man just now. There were regulations of gravity here causing suppression. No one was capable of flying here. Thus, after having been sent flying so high, it was very likely that he might be smashed to bits upon landing. By then, he would definitely be deader than dead. Ling Han smiled and set off again, his hands holding the hands of the two women with him. Bewitching Maiden Ro hurriedly set off in pursuit. Her head was low, looking like a little wife who had been wronged. This side of the cliff was connected to an expansive plain. This time, it really was a plain. The grass was half a foot high, and there was no end in sight. It looked like a green ocean. And in the endless distance, there was a divine dragon hovering in the skies. Even if there was an endless distance between them, they could still sense waves of dragons might spreading out, causing one's heart to soar and submit. However, this was not a real divine dragon, but rather a mountain peak. It was just incredibly steep, so it looked like a dragon. Ling Han and his party then set out towards that divine dragon mountain. This was also the direction in which the others were heading. This plain was really too wide. Even if they were advancing in the same direction, they soon were separated. Just like the myriad of stars dotting the skies, they were also scattered all over this plain, the distance between them farther and farther. They continued forwards. In any case, there was that divine dragon-like mountain acting as a landmark ahead of them, so there was no need to worry that you would lose your way. This ocean-like plain felt very novel to them at first, but when enough time passed, they naturally would be bored of it. Roar! All of a sudden, a black shadow streaked out from the bushes. That was a black panther, its body covered in purple-colored light patterns, and as it pounced, there was a beauty of brilliant lights and flowing colors coming from it. It aimed straight for Bewitching Maiden Ro. Bewitching Maiden Ro was annoyed. Its first target of attack was her. Did it think that she was going to be an easy target? Ha ha! Ling Han laughed loudly. You are indeed the easiest to bully. He did not move, because this black panther wasn't too strong. Bewitching Maiden Ro exclaimed softly, and moved to counterattack the black panther. Pang pang pang. Human and panther were embroiled in an intense battle, and it was actually very hard to tell which of them was better. This black panther was at Een Sol, having very strong battle prowess close to the standards of King tiers. Thus, even if Bewitching Maiden Ro was an Emperor tier, and could still be invincible even with a gap of a minor level, she was still unable to defeat it, at least not very soon. Hunyo was yawning in boredom. Watching this kind of battle was making her very sleepy. Which Ro Nyo's coming to help you? She shot out a punch. Pa! This black panther was instantly sent flying. Ling Han and the Empress both looked surprised, because the black panther actually hadn't been killed by Hunyo. Since the little girl had already moved, she had to have calculated the strength of this black panther. She should have killed the black panther directly with a single punch, but the result was completely different. This punch had only sent the black panther flying. This defense was quite amazing. Pong! The black panther crashed into the bushes. It struggled to get back on its feet, and just barely managed to. Though it had not died, Hunyo had still inflicted a serious injury on it. "Who asked you to bully me?" Bewitching Maiden Ro pounced, and struck heavy blows to it. Now that the Black Panther had sustained serious injury, it naturally could only be beaten submissively in her hands. But even so, it had still been hit at least 100 times before finally dying. "This hide is really tough." Ling Han walked over. He tried out the defenses of the Black Panther, and it had reached about Earth Soul in level. No wonder it only came off with a severe injury even after bearing a blow from Hunyo. "Nyo wants to eat roast meat." Hunyo was beginning to drool. Ling Han skinned and removed the tendons of the Black Panther, yet surprisingly discovered a crystal in the Black Panther's head. It was green and translucent, and dragon's might was vaguely seeping from it. Why would there be dragon's might? The four of them were all surprised. This is the 100 Dragons Mystery Realm, where it is said 100 divine dragons have been buried. They were all celestial king tiers. In that case, there would definitely be a considerable amount of benefits left behind. Enough to cause a transformation in the living creatures here, Ling Han deduced. "Is this edible?" Hunyo stared at the crystal, and licked her lips. This little girl judged if an object was useful or not by seeing if it was edible or not. "This is a dragon crystal. Its effects are weaker than those of dragon's breath, but it still has some benefits after refining," Small Tower suddenly spoke up. "Oh, was that right?" Ling Han put the dragon crystal away. Since it was useful, it naturally could not be wasted. They continued onwards, and saw the Great Plain was gradually disappearing, and the rise and fall of mountains had appeared in front of them. There were also small patches of forest and craggy rocks scattered all over. No wonder a Black Panther had appeared just now. As it turned out, they had entered the area of a mountainous forest. A harsh cry rang out, and they saw a massive golden condor fly across the skies. However, its claws were very strange. They were not the normal claws of birds, but rather 5-clawed dragon paws. Golden light was reflecting from them, as if they were metallic in nature. This harsh cry turned into a blade that sliced over at Ling Han and his party. It was about as long as a mile. As the blade swiped past, large swathes of trees were violently cut down, and nothing could stop its advance. Ling Han humphed, and clenched his hands into fists. Then he too gave a loud shout. Boom! A frightening storm of energy surged out from his body, pouring out diagonally ahead of them. Great clash of source powers. As the storm of energy surged past, a cone-shaped area of vacuum suddenly appeared ahead of them, and the sound wave blade that the golden condor had shot out was also broken, sweeping past on either side of Ling Han and the others without causing the slightest bit of harm. Chapter 2055. Strange Dragon Crystal. When the golden condor saw that its attack had had no effect, it involuntarily released another cry. However, this time it did not release any sound wave blade. It was just a furious cry, as if it was wondering why it had not managed to kill Ling Han and his party with this attack. It was extremely fast. With a quick flap of wings, it had already disappeared in the distance, but it was soon followed by a quick turn. It had immediately flown back, gliding in the skies, but considerably slower now. The golden condor glared at Ling Han and his group, its eyes glittering with coldness. Suddenly, it released another sharp cry that turned into 4 sound wave blades that struck out towards Ling Han, the Empress, Hunyo, and bewitching Maiden Ro, respectively. It was still not giving up. Ling Han moved, and it was still great clash of source powers. A frightening storm of energy exploded, and the 4 sound wave blades were once again destroyed. This golden condor was a heaven's soul, yet the force of its attack had far surpassed that level. It was very possible that it was an emperor tier, or even monarch tier. Thus, to say nothing of how the Empress and Hunyo would not be a match for it, even Ling Han could not possibly match it if he did not use the great clash of source powers. "Get down here!" Ling Han shouted at the skies. The regulations of gravity here were too chaotic, so he could not fly. The golden condor paid no attention to it, and merely circled around in the skies, occasionally releasing another sound wave blade. After repeating this for quite a few times, the golden condor finally understood that this could not possibly kill Ling Han. Then with a flap of its wings, it streaked through the skies. This time, it did not fly back after flying off. Ling Han and the others were very displeased. Though they had not sustained any damage, they were naturally irritated after having a feathery animal attack them repeatedly for so many times when they could not counter for the whole while. Unfortunately, aside from winged creatures, there was no one that could fly here. They could do nothing but stare helplessly. Humph, make sure Nyo doesn't find its lair, or Nyo will tear it apart. Nyo fumed. The four of them continued on their way. They did not enter the forest. Who knew what was living inside it? In a mystery realm, one had to be careful at all times because there were some dangers that came from a great many negligible creatures. For example, bugs. They clearly did not have any cultivation level, but were capable of easily piercing through the defenses of elites and injecting fatal poison. And there were also unremarkable weeds that had sawtooth-shaped leaves that could render even the defenses of immortal palace-tier elites ineffective. These leaves also had powerful poison, and could kill one easily and imperceptibly. For another example, there were sharp rock spikes on the ground, completely indestructible and with a murderous aura that could destroy vital signs. Thus, if one could avoid going into such unknown surroundings, it was best not to. Roar! A beast roar rang out, and a massive black bear walked out from the rocks. It was as tall as 30 meters, flames burning in its eyes, seeming very formidable. Nyo goes! Nyo was excited at the sight of it, and was the first to rush out. We're having bear paws for lunch. Pang! She had just pounced out when a human figure streaked past, crashed into the rock behind them, and slid down with a creak. This great black bear stood on its hind legs, and was still maintaining the position of delivering a paw strike. The one being struck flying back naturally could only be Nyo. Nyo gritted her teeth, and struggled out of the rock. She had been forcefully embedded into the rock, the impact so harsh that it seemed like all the bones in her body had been crushed. What a strong bear paw, but it should be very delicious. She leaped up, and charged off to attack the black bear again. The great black bear used the same move, and still delivered a paw strike. However, while Nyo might look unreliable, her battle perception was extremely high, so how could she possibly fall for the same thing twice? With a turn of her figure, Xiao, she began circling around the great black bear, making maximum use of her agility. What was a rock? As a bird, it could cross 90,000 miles with a single flap of its wings, and its cry rang out through the skies. It was one of the representatives of extreme speed in this world. At this instant, Nyo's images were scattered throughout the area, at least 100 of them. This was because her speed was too high, leaving behind afterimages that looked almost real. Come on, big guy. Nyo is definitely going to munch on your bear paw. The bear paw was constantly in her thoughts. This was the obsession of a glutton. The great black bear snarled. Its cultivation level had already reached the heaven soul, and it itself was a king tier. In terms of strength, it was far superior to Nyo. But the problem here was it could not hit its target at all, so what was the use of its strong battle prowess? Pang, pang, pang. Nyo, on the other hand, kept delivering palm strikes and punches consistently against the black bear. Though she looked pure and cute, she was absolutely harsh and heavy in her attacks. This great black bear was endlessly crying out because of her assault, the flames in its eyes turning into a ball-like form. These two fireballs had been blazing red at first, but they were actually slowly turning darker, and occasionally, a white-colored pattern would appear on them, which appeared very bizarre. A sense of foreboding rose up in Ling Han's heart, and he exclaimed, "Nyo, be careful, never mind, I'll do it." No, Nyo still wants to play. Nyo giggled, and continued to attack the great black bear. Boom! Just at this moment, those two dark-colored balls of light suddenly exploded, turning into a terrifying shock wave. Boom! The surroundings in diameter of 10 miles were all turned into an ocean of flames. There was frightening regulations of fire wreaking havoc there, wanting to burn everything down. Ling Han withdrew his hand. Just now, he had managed to move in time, standing guard in front of the Empress and bewitching Maiden Row, but as for Nyo, Nyo is fine. Nyo giggled. There was a light shield around her. It was a rock that was about to surface from the water, flap its wings and fly. With a soft exclamation from her, this rock flew out, moving to suppress the great black bear. Pang! With a crash, the black bear immediately stumbled, and almost tripped. This was the little girl having awakened the bloodline of the rock, But even such a powerful move only made the great black bear stumble, but did not injure it, which showed that the great black bear's strength was really powerful. Attack together! Ling Han, the Empress, and bewitching Maiden Ro all charged over, ganging up on this great black bear with their combined efforts. If Ling Han did not use the great clash of source powers, even he could not be a match for this great black bear. Even if the four of them worked together, that would only be barely enough. They would only be capable of managing a tie. However, Ling Han's physique was tough enough, and could completely bear the attack of the great black bear. With him focusing on the assault, tightly attracting all the attack power of the great black bear, the three women were allowed to completely unleash the full force of their assault. After wearing it out for 2 days, they finally managed to kill this great black bear. They all slumped onto the ground, feeling extremely tired. After panting a few times, they all laughed loudly, feeling a happiness they could not describe. Using their own actual strength to kill a fierce beast stronger than themselves gave a very strong feeling of accomplishment. Bear paw! Bear paw! Only Hu Niu was extraordinarily energetic. She surveyed the great black bear very happily, her drool dripping. Ling Han rested for a while, and then dismembered the great black bear. The 4 bear paws were barbecued on the bonfire, and it was just enough for each of them to have one. The meat of a heaven soul immortal beast was very delicious in the first place. What more when it was something as fine as bear paw? Here's another dragon crystal. He drew out a red dragon crystal from within the brain of the great black bear. There seems to be some kind of design on it. Bewitching Maiden Ro's eyes were quite sharp. The Empress took it over for a look, and soon nodded. Chapter 2056. A great river blocks the path. Ling Han put this strange dragon crystal away, and they continued forwards. He could study it slowly, and there was no need to rush things now. 4 hours later, they encountered another fierce beast, but its strength was much lower. After they killed it, they very naturally obtained another dragon crystal. However, this was a very normal dragon crystal, and there were no strange patterns on it. Could it be that only stronger creatures would produce this kind of pattern dragon crystal? They guessed. This was very easily verified because they encountered a colossal creature not too long after. This was a massive tortoise, and it was slowly crawling in the mountains. However, every step of its feet would cause the mountains and earth to shake, creating an astonishing commotion. Boom! This massive tortoise immediately discovered Ling Han and his group, and immediately placed down a clawed leg. It was like a mountain peak had descended, causing the winds to whistle sharply, and there was a yellow-colored seal glowing beneath its claws. If this seal had not been there, Ling Han and his group could have chosen not to dodge, and just allowed it to land on them. No matter how great its power was, it would be useless as it could not harm them at all. At most, they would only be buried into the ground, or simply create a hole in its own foot, as if Ling Han and his group were nails. In front of regulations, pure power was like pure paste, completely meaningless. Thus, all Celestials had to cultivate regulations. It was a different story when power had been fused with regulations. That would create a frightening impact. With the support of regulations, power would also unleash the destructive force that it should have. Ling Han shouted, and raised a fist to parry. Boom, a loud bang rang out, and the tortoise's foot landed. Nothing could block its course. When the tortoise's foot rose again, Ling Han and his party were all embedded in the ground, but all of them were completely unwounded. This was because Ling Han had stretched out a shield of origin power, which had cancelled out the impact caused by this stomp from the giant tortoise. Otherwise, aside from Ling Han, the other 3 women would be throwing up blood. In the case of bewitching Maiden Ro, who was too weak, it was not impossible that she would be directly stomped into mush, either. Boom! The giant tortoise's foot had just risen when it was again descending at a frighteningly rapid speed. It was clearly going to stomp repeatedly, and stomp Ling Han and his group into bits. Who asked you to be arrogant? Ling Han summoned the divine demon sword. Man and sword fused as one, and shot into the skies. Pooh! A spurt of blood sprayed out, and Ling Han forcefully ripped open the giant tortoise's tough hide, penetrating through the sole of its foot. The divine demon sword unleashed a blazing light, continuing to slash towards the giant tortoise's head. The giant tortoise released a pained roar. With its size, This stab wound from Ling Han was actually no different from being pricked by a needle. It would naturally hurt, but it would only be a momentary pain. But who asked it to have been created by the divine demon's sword? This was a future celestial tool, so how overbearing would its destructive force be? At this moment, the murderous aura was wreaking havoc inside the giant tortoise's body. As it surged, the adjacent part of blood and flesh would immediately lose vitality and turn into a mound of dead flesh. Fortunately, the giant tortoise was big enough and could lay down layer after layer of defenses in its body, so the murderous aura left behind by the divine demon sword was continuously weakened and ultimately disappeared. No matter how Ling Han brandished his sword, he would be able to succeed, so this big guy was soon sprawled out on the ground, turning into a dead tortoise. Cracking its head open, they found a dirt yellow dragon crystal. Upon closer examination, it was covered with patterns. This was another special dragon crystal. The patterns are different, Ling Han said after studying it for a while. The three women all nodded. Though the patterns were complex, and an ordinary person would become dizzy from the sight, this group would be able to completely memorize every single detail of the veined pattern. These weren't seals of great Tao that would be slowly erased from their memory by the heaven and earth after a single glance. Who cares? Let's go, Hunyo said casually. Indeed, they could not distinguish anything, so their only option was to continue forwards. As they headed towards that divine dragon mountain, they killed many more wild beasts on their way. Some gave them ordinary dragon crystals, while others produced special dragon crystals. All in all, they obtained a lot of normal dragon crystals, about 10 times the number of special dragon crystals. After spending a full month, they were finally close to approaching that divine dragon mountain, but their path forwards had disappeared, and they could only stop and stand there. There was no further path, as a massive river had blocked their advance. The river flow was extraordinarily wide. At least, it was not something that anyone could cross with a single leap. Then cross the bridge in a vessel. Ling Han tried to take out the wooden ship stored in the Black Tower, but the moment he tossed it into the river, it was completely corroded. There were multiple seals of Great Tao surging in the river waters, and it was these seals of Great Tao that easily destroyed the wooden ship. The wooden ship could not survive, and neither could a metal one. Nothing could hold up against the corrosive abilities of the river waters. Perhaps divine metal could, but who would use divine metal to build a ship? Wasn't that a massive waste? Let's walk around. Perhaps there is a bridge, or perhaps we would reach the source. They walked along the great river, and passed a great many people on their way. They also encountered a considerable number of people that had walked over from the opposite direction, and this gave Ling Han and his group a sense of foreboding. Perhaps this river flowed in a circle around the entire divine dragon mountain. In that case, they could not possibly walk to the source no matter how much they walked. But without walking a whole round, who would give up? This round was astonishingly huge, and they had walked for a total of 17 days before Ling Han and his party finally returned to where they had originally come from. As expected, the great river was closed, and no path was left. How were they supposed to cross the river then? Wait, no! Ling Han suddenly recalled that he had indeed seen many people as he walked along the great river, but there was also a great many people that he had not seen, like those few super monarch tiers. In fact, he had not encountered Du Xiaojun, Long Butian, and the others either. Could it be that these people had been walking ahead of them all this while, and that was why they had not met them all this while? Let's walk another round. This time, Ling Han and his party chose to walk around in the opposite direction. True enough, there were a great many people that had been advancing in the same direction as Ling Han and his group previously, and that was why they had not met. However, now that they had circled around in the opposite direction, they had spotted them, but Tian Qingyue, Yu Huaqing, and the others were still not to be seen. There must be a path that leads to Divine Dragon Mountain here. Everyone speaks of wanting to ascend Divine Dragon Mountain, but with the great river blocking the way, there is no way to advance at all. Perhaps there is an underground passage that can let us cross the river? Ling Han asked. Then we'll dig our own. Hunyo was energized now. In her eyes, this was something very fun. The little girl was the type to do as she said. However, she had only dug downwards a little when the river waters flowed out. If it were not for the fact that Ling Han had moved fast enough and grabbed the little girl, whom he quickly tossed to one side. She would probably have been corroded by the river waters. Chapter 2057. Halfway snatched. What evil river waters! Almost hurt Niu. Niu was abruptly angered, furious at the river waters. Ling Han smiled, and walked forwards as he held Niu's hand. Come on. Let's kill some more wild beasts. They began a hunting trip. Very soon, this made Niu elated again because the little girl had food again. As a glutton, what else could she ask for? One after another, wild beasts collapsed at their feet, producing a large number of dragon crystals for them. Though the majority was ordinary dragon crystals, this thing was still very nutritious, and had the amazing effect of aiding them in increasing their comprehension. Who would complain about having too many? Worst come to worst, they could always sell them in exchange for star stones. They obtained more and more special dragon crystals, but it was still far from the map that Ling Han had spoken of. At least for now, it was still a mess, and there was absolutely no way to piece them together. Here's another big guy. 2 months later, they arrived at a small hill. There was a golden lion ahead of them, but it had 3 tails. Upon closer look, each tail actually also bore a head, though they were much smaller and weren't very obvious. What kind of monster was this? Who cares what kind of monster it is? We'll kill it and eat it. Niu cried out, and was the first to charge out. Ling Han, the Empress, and bewitching Maiden Ro also hurriedly pursued. The coordination among the 4 of them was getting more and more tacit by now. When they joined forces, they could deal with even Heaven's Soul Emperor tiers. After all, intelligence was a clear weakness of the wild beasts here. They could be easily led around by the noise. Their superior battle prowess was all for naught, and there was no need to be afraid. The 4 of them besieged it, but still spent close to 8 hours before finally dealing with this big guy. Ling Han had already gone a very long time without using the great clash of source powers, because he also wanted the 3 women to toughen up as well. Source power was naturally best trained in actual battle. There's a big guy here. A voice filled with pleased surprise rang out. A group of 7 appeared, and when they discovered that Ling Han and his group were here, they all revealed malevolent expressions. Ling Han's eyes swept over this group, and couldn't help but feel surprised because there was actually a person that he knew among this group of 7. Wan Dongxiang. Strange. Why did he see this guy wherever he went? A yellow-robed middle-aged man stepped out from the group of 7, and arrogantly demanded, "You guys can scram now." When his gaze swept over Niu and the other women, his eyes lit up, and he looked stunned, but did not say something along the lines of demanding that the 3 women stay behind. After all, with them being able to kill such a large monster, the strength of these 4 people was definitely extraordinary. If they could avoid conflict, it was best to. Wan Dongxiang glared hatefully at Ling Han, but he had only managed to join this team by shamelessly currying favor with them. So how could he possibly dare to cause a conflict between these people because of personal grudges? He only prayed secretly that Ling Han would not be willing to compromise. In that case, even if both sides didn't want a battle, there would be no other option. I don't know how to. Why don't you demonstrate by scramming first for our entertainment? Ling Han said, smiling slightly. If others do not offend me, neither will I offend others. But if they do, I will definitely beat them silly. The yellow-robed middle-aged man was momentarily stunned, and then showed a menacing expression. At first, I wanted to let you guys live, but you have such a bad mouth, and are so determined to seek your own death. Chapter 2058. You dare deceive me. In the eyes of the yellow-robed middle-aged man and the others, Ling Han was the largest threat, and had to be killed at the first possible moment. Otherwise, not only would it endanger their lives, the Empress and Niu would also have insurance for their lives, and could not be easily gotten rid of. But if Ling Han was killed first, they would eliminate a great enemy. In that case, not only would they be able to win, it was even possible that they could capture the Empress and Niu alive. If they had the chance, they naturally wanted to get intimate with them. After all, these 2 women were extraordinarily beautiful. In their eyes, if the 6 of them worked together, they would definitely be able to take Ling Han down. After all, The gap between the cultivation levels of both sides was apparent. This was applicable in most situations, but only against Ling Han was it ineffective. The toughness of his physique had reached a freakish level, and it was not something that any dividing soul tier could penetrate. Pang! 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 Under the combined barrage of 6 cultivators at the peak stage of Heaven's Soul, Ling Han continuously attacked. There were some attacks that he had indeed not managed to dodge, and there were some he did not even bother to. This physique allowed him to be as willful as he liked. His fists pounded repeatedly, so fast that it could not be described with words. How's it possible? The speed which he punches at least 3 times faster than ours. He alone can completely block the attacks of 3 people altogether. Freak! The yellow-robed middle-aged man and the others were all dumbfounded. It was obvious that Ling Han's battle prowess was inferior to theirs, yet the speed at which he attacked was astonishingly fast, with him completely blocking the combined attacks of 3 of their members. Though there were still 3 other people whose attacks were effective, some of the attacks would be dodged by Ling Han, and he would take on other attacks head-on. Thus, the 6 of them ganging up on him was practically useless. On the other hand, the Empress and Hu Niu were continuously causing damage to them. Though it was not fatal, if their injuries continued to accumulate, it would ultimately cause a qualitative change. Forget about this brat. Let's kill those 2 women first, the yellow-robed middle-aged man called out loudly. At this instant, he did not have any further asterisk. Compared to his own life and future, what were mere women worth? As long as he was still alive, and as long as he had status, what beautiful woman would not come easily at just a wave of his hand? He was very clear about his priorities. The other 5 all agreed, and changed the target of their attacks. This time, it had returned to the previous situation. Ling Han was using the regulations of space and time to distribute the force of attack on the 2 women. However, in this manner, the battle entered once more into a stalemate. Yuan Dongxiang looked towards bewitching Maiden Ro, his eyes shining viciously. He was naturally stunned by Ling Han's strength. 3 mere young souls were actually capable of blocking 6 heaven souls. This was practically inconceivable. But now that things had progressed thus far, what time did he have to be stunned? He was sure that he would lose his life if it was Ling Han's side that won. Thus, he had locked onto bewitching Maiden Ro. Why had he not gone into battle? That was because he was too weak, so even if he did go into battle, he would only be in the way. Then similarly, the reason why bewitching Maiden Ro had not gone on stage was also because she was weaker. If even Ling Han and the others were only young souls, then bewitching Maiden Ro could only be at young soul 2 at most. He was an earth soul, and also had the aptitude of a king tier. He could be invincible in this cultivation level. On the contrary, his intelligence was the highest, and they would only be able to win by depending on him. Yuan Dongxiang leaped out, and charged towards bewitching Maiden Ro. Immediately, bewitching Maiden Ro looked pitiful, and said, "Please don't hurt me. I am willing to do anything for you." Immediately, Yuan Dongxiang's heart beat wildly. Bewitching Maiden Ro was extremely alluring, and when she pleaded with him softly, he could feel his bones practically melt. Furthermore, anything caused his imagination to run wildly. Bewitching Maiden Ro walked towards him in an incredibly seductive manner, her slender waist swaying left and right, showing off an endless grace and sexual appeal. Yuan Dongxiang was completely captivated. He clearly knew that this was inappropriate, but he subjectively enjoyed this scene incredibly, and had no desire to make any kind of reaction at all. "Idiot!" A voice filled with mockery rang out, and Yuan Dongxiang felt a pain in his chest. He hurriedly got out of the way, and shockingly discovered that there was a sharp blade stuck in his chest that had pierced it right above his heart. If he had not stepped slightly to the side when he experienced pain, his heart would probably have burst by now. To dividing soul-tier elites, while the heart bursting would not cause death, it would still cause a great damage because the life force of the cultivator was gathered in the heart's blood. Any loss would cause great injury. He was furious and hateful as he harshly exclaimed, "Witch, you dare deceive me!" Bewitching Maiden Ro showed a regretful expression. At first, she had wanted to pierce the top of Yuan Dongxiang's head and shatter his mind, making a fatal strike. However, this position was too sensitive. She feared that the moment she raised her dagger, the other party would immediately become alert, so stabbing the heart bore a higher guarantee of success. This was also because her charm techniques were not skillful enough. Otherwise, even if she stabbed aiming for his mind, Ruan Dongxiang would probably just wait for death with a smile on his face. I am a deceiving witch in the first place, so what? Bewitching Maiden Rose scoffed. Ruan Dongxiang's hand covered his chest. He was presently suppressing his injuries. The other party had used a 4-star pseudo-celestial tool, and the injury caused by this stab was not something that could be easily recovered from. Even if it had not truly stabbed into his heart, it was still enough to cause his battle prowess to drop massively. Even if I am injured, I can still kill you easily, he shouted, his eyes bloodshot as he charged towards Bewitching Maiden Ro. In your dreams, Bewitching Maiden Ro retorted with disdain. This kind of man that would only bully delicate women was the most disgraceful type. Boom, boom, boom. The two of them also began to fight. At first, Ruan Dongxiang should have been able to enjoy an absolute advantage, but because he had sustained an injury, his battle prowess had dropped greatly. Thus, even though he still had the upper hand, if he wanted to capture or even kill Bewitching Maiden Ro, it was not something that could be done quickly. Fires of rage burnt in his heart, and he no longer concerned himself with the situation going on between Ling Han's group and his 6 companions. All he wanted to do now was to capture Bewitching Maiden Ro. He swore that if he captured Bewitching Maiden Ro alive, he was going to asterisk her till death. If she died, he was still going to asterisk her. Throughout his life, he had never been deceived by any woman before, and he had even sustained a serious injury because of this. Under his powerful offensive, Bewitching Maiden Ro's situation became worse and worse. She was completely suppressed, and could not even manage a single counter. Even defending herself was very straining on her. Yet now, he could play with the woman belonging to another man, which made him feel a perverse kind of satisfaction. Squeeze them to the point they burst. His eyes burned with fire, and his palm grabbed out without the slightest bit of mercy. Pa, the palm landed. That's not right. Why is it completely empty? Ruan Dongxiang astonishingly discovered that his wrist had actually been grabbed by someone else, and he had not managed to lay his palm on those impressive breasts of Bewitching Maiden Ro. The person that had grabbed him was Ling Han. Hadn't this guy been embroiled in an intense battle with the others? Gasp. Ruan Dongxiang immediately came to a realization. He turned his head again, and saw that the yellow-robed middle-aged man and the others had already been defeated. Some had been sliced into half, while some into 6 pieces, and some had even been turned into a pile of mush without even a single complete bone left to be seen. With a shudder, he felt his legs grow weak. Chapter 2059. Transfer. What was going on? Just now, they had still been battling intensely, yet now the battle had already ended. Ruan Dongxiang pondered deeply, and his expression involuntarily changed drastically. It had not been just a while. The power gap between himself and Bewitching Maiden Ro was not very big, so when he had completely suppressed Bewitching Maiden Ro, it had at least been after 1,000 to 2,000 moves. How long would that need? They had taken their own sweet time. Ling Han smiled faintly and said, "To be a man that bullies women, don't you feel embarrassed?" What do you want to do?" Ruan Dongxiang asked in a trembling voice. "Poke your eyes out," Bewitching Maiden Ro declared furiously. She stretched out her right hand and stabbed into Ruan Dongxiang's eyes. Ah! Ruan Dongxiang wailed in pain. Though she had not blinded him, it was still overwhelmingly painful. Bewitching Maiden Ro's fury still did not decrease, with her striking Ruan Dongxiang repeatedly. This guy actually almost killed her, and even dared to think of touching her breasts. He was too despicable. What's the point of speaking such nonsense with him? Just kill him. Hunyo exclaimed. No, don't kill me. Ruan Dongxiang exclaimed. I can give you anything. I beg you, don't kill me. I don't need anything. Ling Han shot out a punch. Bang! Ruan Dongxiang exploded into a shower of blood. It's not a divided soul this time, right? Bewitching Maiden Ro asked. Ling Han sensed for a while, and then nodded. It's not a divided soul. It's the main body. He walked back, and took away the spatial god tools belonging to the yellow-robed middle-aged man and his companions. When he opened them, aside from ordinary dragon crystals, there were also some special dragon crystals. Clearly, they also knew the use of the special dragon crystals, and that was why they had demanded that Ling Han and his group leave behind the corpse of that golden lion. Looks like a great many people know the use of the special dragon crystals. Ling Han and his group did not know, because Fu Yu himself did not know. As for Du Xiaojun, he probably knew as well. After all, he was a native of Universal Peace Heaven, and he had not told Ling Han, probably not because he did not want to, but rather because he did not know that Ling Han was not knowledgeable about the situation in here. One asked no questions, whereas the other explained nothing, leading to the present situation. Looks like we are heading in the right direction. The special dragon crystals can help us find the path that breaks through the great river. They continued wandering and hunting wild beasts, collecting more and more special dragon crystals. When they had reached the critical point, they would then be able to piece these dragon crystals together. One after another, the veined patterns joined together, actually forming the shape of a doorway. However, because they still lacked a little less than half, this doorway was still far from being completed. Is this a transfer portal? Ling Han and the others all guessed. It actually wasn't a map. Very possibly. There was nothing much left to say. They continued to hunt fierce beasts, and several months later, Ling Han and his party finally obtained the final special dragon crystal. When Ling Han embedded this dragon crystal in the portal, Wang, the dragon crystal door suddenly burst out with bright light. It was the multiple crystals that were shining. All the veined patterns had aligned together, and it was like there was blood flowing in them. Finally, a revolving halo of light appeared in the initially empty space in the middle of the doorway. It is indeed a transfer portal. Ling Han could sense the strong regulations of space. Let's go! They did not hesitate at all, and all of them leaped into the doorway. A while after Ling Han entered, this doorway of light trembled lightly. Pa pa pa! It suddenly shattered, and the dragon crystals shattered all over the ground. If they were picked up and examined, one would discover that these dragon crystals had already turned into dust. Ling Han felt as if he had entered into a quagmire. The absorption ability of the surroundings was astonishingly strong. He clearly had his eyes wide open, but could not see anything at all. He experienced a feeling of weightlessness and helplessness. But it was only an instant, and he immediately felt his whole body become light. He was already at the foot of a tall mountain. When he raised his head, he could only see a steep mountain so high that it towered into the clouds, but he could not see all the way to the top. Divine Dragon Mountain. Realization immediately dawned on him. Though he had only surveyed it from a very long distance before, unlike now when he had directly arrived at the foot of the mountain, how could he not recognize it after seeing it for so many days? What a tall mountain! Hunyo said ruefully. Is our destination at the mountain's summit? Let's go! They began climbing. There was a special regulation of gravity here that did not permit anyone to fly. And if they climbed, the gravity would also become extremely astonishing when they reached a certain height. It was as if they were carrying a star on their back, and every step forwards was very difficult. All four of them were panting, and even Ling Han was not having an easy time. This regulations of gravity varied from person to person. The stronger the person, the stronger the pressure he would experience, and no one would have any kind of advantage. So tired. So tired. Hunyo stuck out her tongue, and simply sprawled out on the ground as she began crawling. Even if she had grown up into an extremely beautiful woman, there was still not much change in her essence. She was still as much of a glutton and as wacky as she had always been. The Empress was much more reserved. Though she was also sweating heavily, she did not seem like she was going to stop for a rest at all, and it was even more impossible that she would copy Hunyo. Ling Han couldn't help but ask, "Why don't you two enter into the Black Tower?" The Empress shook her head, her eyes firm. This was a test for her, and she had to be the one to complete it. Meanwhile, Hunyo said, "This is quite fun." Bewitching Maiden Ro raised her hand. "I want to go in. I want to go in. You just step aside." Ling Han rolled his eyes at her. Bewitching Maiden Ro couldn't help but twiddle with her fingers plaintively. This unromantic rude boar was really too despicable. They climbed for 5 days, and the scenery at the foot of the mountain was no longer visible at all, leaving behind only white hazy clouds wafting around them. But when they raised their heads, the mountain was still steep and high, and the summit could not be seen. Just how many days would they have to walk on for? Ha! Ling Han was suddenly stunned, stopping Hu Niu, who had just been about to advance forwards. Naturally, the Empress and bewitching Maiden Ro, who had been behind, also stopped. Something green had appeared ahead of them. It was too normal for green to appear in the mountains, but the problem was that this green was capable of movement. This was a person. Ling Han and his group all looked astounded. This was a well-built man, having the head of a dragon and a human body. His whiskers were all green in color, and so he looked like a green vine that was capable of movement from afar. "Outsiders, please come with me," this dragon-headed man said. Ling Han and the others exchanged looks. The wild beasts from before only knew to kill, but this guy was actually so polite that they could not figure him out. "Come." The dragon-headed man crooked a finger again, then turned and left. "Let's follow." Ling Han only hesitated slightly, and then immediately came to a decision. Hu Niu and the Empress naturally would not have any disagreement, and immediately moved to follow. "Why doesn't anyone ask for my opinion?" Bewitching Maiden Ro grumbled, and could only follow behind the other three. As they traveled, the majority of their time was either spent walking on the mountain or walking around mountain peaks. After walking for about 2 hours, a small town actually appeared ahead of them. All the houses were built from wood, and it was filled with a primitive vibe. Chapter 2060. Azure Dragon Town. There were a considerable number of people in the small town. Some had the head of a dragon with the body of a human, and some had a dragon's body with a human head, but no matter their appearance, their hair was all lush green. And in this town, the regulations of gravity had actually vanished. "Please come with me," the dragon-headed man leading them said again, guiding Ling Han and his party into the town. The entry of 4 outsiders did not cause any commotion. The townspeople were still doing whatever they were doing, looking like they did not realize that a few monsters had come here. They walked all the way to the town square. There was a temple made completely out of logs here, with a green dragon sculpture at the very top. It extended all the way across the entire temple, its dragon whiskers incredibly realistic, as if they were still fluttering as a breeze passed over them. "Please." The dragon-headed man continued to lead the way, bringing Ling Han and his group to the atrium inside the temple. He finally stopped here. "Please sit for a while, and allow me to ask the elder to come out." Ling Han and the others were completely baffled. They had been brought here by someone they did not know, and he did not even explain anything. Anyone would be completely confused and befuddled. After a while, the dragon-headed man from before returned, but there was an elder following behind him now. This elder had a human head with a dragon's body. His head was bald, so there was no green on his head, but his brows and beard were still green. There seemed to be no escape from the fate of being lush green in color. "I am Nasu." A smile appeared on the elder's face, his eyes radiant with light, exuding a frightening pressure. This was an elite, probably an ascending origin tier existence. Ling Han could just vaguely estimate it. "Greetings, senior." Ling Han and the others all bowed in greeting. Nasu raised a hand and said, "It is once again the time for the 100 Dragons Mystery Realm to open. I have been waiting a very long time for this day. Dare I ask, why has Senior summoned us here?" Ling Han asked. Nasu was just about to speak when another old monk walked over. Immediately, his brow wrinkled in a frown. "Amitabha Buddha!" This old monk chanted, and everyone felt their ears vibrate strongly with the chant, and almost passed out. This old monk was also very powerful. "I am Na Kong." The second old monk smiled at Ling Han and his party. "I wish to ask for good karma from you 4 benefactors." "For benefactors, it would be better to form this good karma with me." Nasu hurriedly spoke up, looking like it would be his loss if he did not speak up. Ling Han and the others exchanged looks, even more confused. What on earth was going on here? "If you form this good karma with me, I can help increase the benefits 3-fold when you get instilled with power by the 100 dragons," Na Kong said. "I promise you that I can increase it 4-fold. Nasu was unwilling to back down as well. 5-fold. 6-fold. The two old monks suddenly argued so intensely that their faces and ears were flushed, almost coming to blows. Ling Han and the others were even more confused. Were they having an internal conflict? Dare I ask, seniors, what exactly is this good karma? Ling Han asked. As the two elderly monks continued their argument, they were also explaining to Ling Han. They would be arguing for 3 lines, and then insert a single line of explanation, and with such scattered words of explanation put together, Ling Han and his party finally found out what was going on. This small town was called Azure Dragon Town, and everyone here had the bloodline of the dragon tribe. However, they had been trapped for generations on this divine dragon mountain, and could not leave. No one knew the reason. Whoever attained the first place would be able to obtain a dragon pearl from the divine dragon temple. When they collected 9,999 dragon pearls, they would then be able to summon the divine dragon, and bring their whole clan safely out of the 100 Dragons mystery realm. Yet the candidates for the contest had to be outsiders. Thus, it had led to the previous argument between Na Su and Na Kong. The so-called good karma was signing an agreement with the clan they were in, and fighting on their behalf in this period of time. As time passed, the number of dragon pearls collected by the 7 great clans was getting closer and closer to the required number. But the number of dragon pearls collected by the clans that Na Su and Na Kong belonged to was the least. Thus, they were also the most anxious, being in urgent need of winning so that they could catch up with the other 5 great clans ahead of them. What they feared was if there was just this one opportunity to leave. No one wanted to be trapped eternally on this divine dragon mountain. Na Su and Na Kong both put out very high offers, hoping that Ling Han and his group could join the clan they were in. No matter how strong Ling Han and his group were, one additional person meant additional power. Ling Han did not agree rashly, but rather chose to wait and see. He could not just agree rashly just by hearing some words from them. What if this contest was incredibly dangerous, and people would easily die? Whatever the case, he had to get a full understanding first. Though Na Kong and Na Su were both very anxious, they could not do anything. They could only arrange accommodations for the 4 of them. However, they each sent out a representative from their clans that could speak well, and would continue to convince Ling Han and his group. All the outsiders had been arranged accommodations inside the divine temple. There was an extremely large courtyard that was especially built to accommodate them. Using regulations of space, it might not look large from the outside, but was a completely different world on the inside. Thus, from the outside, it looked like there were doors built into a wall, and appeared very close together, and also seemed extremely ugly. There were a great many people standing outside, discussing something with one another. Newcomers. Someone spotted Ling Han. "Newcomer, come here!" A purple-robed young man immediately shouted at Ling Han and his group, bearing a strong tone of command. Ling Han only glanced at him and asked, "Have your parents not taught you how to speak?" Immediately, the purple-robed young man's eyes were spitting fire, and he looked like he was about to charge at Ling Han. "Brother Bao, calm down. Calm down." Someone on the sidelines hurriedly played mediator, grabbing tightly onto the purple-robed young man. "Let me go, I am going to teach this guy a lesson." The purple-robed young man struggled strongly, looking like he was fuming with rage. Ling Han chuckled, and clenching his right hand into a fist, he shot out a punch at the empty air in front of him. Pung! Endless regulations moved, dazzling the universe. After this strike, everyone slanted a glance at Ling Han. So powerful! He was clearly only at Young Soul, but his battle prowess was actually so strong that it had reached the peak stage of Earth Soul. No, it might have even reached the level of Heaven Soul, the early stage of Heaven Soul. Meanwhile, the purple-robed young man's mouth was gaping widely. However, he could not make a single sound, his expression slightly amusing. "Let me go, let me go." After being stunned for a while, he called out again. The person beside him expressed that he was very innocent. That was because he had forgotten to hold the purple-robed young man in his shock. Thus, why was he still saying "let me go"? Why couldn't they all choose one side? In fact, when there was a difference in opinion, joining the strongest side was not a good idea, either. Du Xiaojun wasn't very sure, either, and also could not figure out what the reason for doing so was. I don't care what others say. In my opinion, the most effort-saving method is for everyone to choose the same clan to join, he said thus. Ling Han also thought that there was nothing wrong with this choice, but since the veterans said this, there had to be a reason for it. The people who were in charge of communicating with the 7 clans were the 4 super monarch tiers Tian Qingyue and the other supreme existences. In the eyes of the people of the universal peace heaven and the surrounding heavenly realms, there was no other that was more qualified than these 4 people. However, those that had personally seen Ling Han and Ji Wuming stimulate the Black Dragon Bridge did not think so, but this portion of people was not large. Thus, they could not influence the opinion of the majority. Ling Han was fine with it though. In any case, this was not inconsistent with his ideas. Tian Qingyue and the others did not rashly make any decisions, but rather negotiated with the 7 great clans, choosing the best offer. Since their choice involved the fates of the 7 great clans, they naturally had to get a good price. The treasure that the 7 clans were willing to offer was called Heavenly Dragon Bone Ashes. It was formed from the remaining bones of the ancient heavenly dragon mixed together with dirt, and had been diluted who knew how many times over, but it was precisely because of this that they were able to use it. Otherwise, how could a mere dividing soul tier touch the bones that a celestial king tier had left behind? Merely coming close to it would cause their body to crumble and bones to shatter. What was the use of Heavenly Dragon Bone Ashes? It was to multiply the benefits that one would get when the 100 dragons instilled power randomly ranging from double to 10-fold. The greater the amplification, the more Heavenly Dragon Bone Ashes would naturally be needed, and the Heavenly Dragon Bone Ashes was also incredibly precious to the 7 clans. Those were Celestial King tier remains, and had been left behind by the elites of the Dragon Tribe at that. To these people that possessed the bloodline of the Dragon Tribe, it was naturally even more valuable and beneficial. Thus, if all of them were going to join a single clan, whichever clan would not be able to offer too high a price. Moreover, they weren't dumb, either. With so many people joining their clan, it was definitely an assured victory for them, so why would they still have to offer a high price? And the matter was thus stalled like this. In any case, there was still some time before the contest began, so everyone still had the opportunity to bargain. Ling Han was not concerned about this. He found a local of Azure Dragon Town, and asked about where their Heavenly Dragon Bone Ashes had come from. At the beginning, he was only thinking of giving it a try, but he had not expected that these people would actually really tell him. They had been picked up from the mountain. This was just like a mineral ore. When you found this kind of rock, the Heavenly Dragon Bone Ashes would be contained inside. Of course, this kind of mineral ore was extremely rare, and there would be competitors as well, the wild beasts in the mountains. They, too, yearned for the Heavenly Dragon Bone Ashes as they could help them become stronger. In this place, though there was a clear cultivation hierarchy, whether among the wild beasts or the dragon men, they did not cultivate the regulations of heaven and earth, but those of the unique environment that had been created after 100 divine dragons had died. If they left this 100 dragons mystery realm, then the regulations that they had grasped would be instantly erased. That was because the regulations that they had grasped were not recognized at all by the heaven and earth, and could only be used here. From a certain aspect, they were also cultivators of a different cultivation system, but their cultivation was still based on the regulations of the celestial realm. Thus, they would still gain approval from the heaven and earth to a certain extent. At least, their lifespan would not be severed together with their cultivation. Chapter 2062. Provoking on behalf of the Master. Ling Han and his group arrived at the area that the townspeople of Azure Dragon Town spoke of. It naturally was in the mountains, and there was a naturally formed canyon here. Both sides were towering, steep mountain cliffs, and as the mountain winds whistled through here, there would be a few rocks occasionally carried by the wind too. If these rocks were blown onto your face, it would ache and be sore. And among these rocks, some would contain Heavenly Dragon Bone Ashes. If one was lucky enough to rake some in, that would really be hitting the jackpot. The Empress waved her hand casually, and sucked in all the rocks that flew out to her hand. Then with a slight tremor, these rocks were all crushed to dust. There were no Heavenly Dragon Bone Ashes. If there had been some, these rocks would not have been crushed, as they were as hard as divine metal. Not, of course, but they were definitely not inferior to 7 or 8 star pseudo-divine metal. After all, They contained the bone ashes of a celestial king tier, so how could they not be amazingly strong? Ling Han and his party were just planning on entering the canyon when another group of people came from behind them. The one in the lead was a man of lanky build, and naturally had an intimidating presence to him. It was Tian Qingyue, one of the 4 super monarch tiers of the universal peace heaven. When he saw that Ling Han and his group were also here, a hint of disdain flashed through Tian Qingyue's gaze. He considered himself very noble, so he naturally did not take everyone seriously. Of course, this was also because he had left too quickly, and had not discovered that the Empress and Hu Niu had similarly stimulated the Golden Dragon Bridge. Furthermore, Ling Han had even stepped onto the Black Dragon Bridge. That was the most venerable divine path. If he had known, his present attitude would definitely not have been like this. However, when he saw how exquisitely beautiful the Empress and Hu Niu were, and how alluring and graceful bewitching Maiden Ro was, even Tian Qingyue's eyes lit up, and he took a second look at Ling Han. This brat's luck with women was practically enough to drive anyone mad with envy. To actually have 3 women who were as beautiful as celestial maidens, each having a different kind of charm, to accompany him. This was really baffling to others, and they could not accept this. Wasn't it just a shame? Not only Tian Qingyue was an arrogant bully, even the 9 lackeys behind him were similarly insufferably obnoxious. They probably thought that now that they had such a powerful backer like Tian Qingyue, everyone else was below their notice. Someone saw the stunned expression that flashed quickly through Tian Qingyue's eyes, and immediately became aware that this was a good opportunity to curry favor with this lord. He stepped out, and in a flash, he already stepped in front of Ling Han and his group, blocking their way forward. However, he did not use force, but rather bowed very courteously, and said, "My name is Xikong Hao. Greetings, 3 celestial maidens." 3 celestial maidens? Then what about Ling Han? Xikong Hao had clearly spoken deliberately. He purposely wanted to leave Ling Han out. And if Ling Han was not happy, and wanted a fight? Then he'd take the chance to thrash Ling Han harshly so that he would come out of it dejected and depressed. And at that time, Tian Qingyue only had to step in, and rebuke him harshly. He could then play the role of a nice guy, and also show off his formidable might. You see, Ling Han could not even match Xikong Hao, but Tian Qingyue was capable of reprimanding the latter harshly, and in an instant, his image would become mighty and noble. For a lackey to go so far, he was actually quite dutiful enough. Ling Han swatted a hand dismissively, and said, "A good dog doesn't block the way. Scram." He couldn't help but smile, and did not stop him. In his opinion, he had not been moved by the Empress and the other women, and merely admired their beauty and grace slightly. Furthermore, he indeed thought that Ling Han was not worthy of the 3 women. Thus, if the Empress and the others could see Ling Han's true face, he thought that he would be helping the 3 women. Of course, he would definitely not show off deliberately. That was too purposeful and low-grade, which he was disdainful of doing. If he, Tian Qingyue, wanted to pursue any woman, who would actually refuse him? Ling Han chuckled and said, "Trash, there is some type of bootlicking that cannot be done casually, because you have no idea how strong the enemy you provoked would be." "What you mean is that you are very strong, and I have trifled wrongly with you?" Xikong Hao raised a brow, continuing to express his disdain of Ling Han. He wanted nothing more than for Ling Han to make a move. Ling Han nodded. "You are overwhelmingly wrong. A mere young soul, I can suppress you single-handedly." Xikong Hao scoffed. Previously, every person who registered would register their cultivation level, and when they obtained heavenly dragon bone ashes, it would then be distributed according to their respective cultivation levels. You didn't think that everyone would be able to get an equal share of the heavenly dragon bone ashes, right? How could this be possible? Thus, Xikong Hao knew that Ling Han and his party were all only young souls, and he, on the other hand, was a heaven soul, and also had the aptitude of a king tier. Even if Ling Han and his group were monarch tiers, they could only kneel in submission in front of him. What a despicable guy, let Niu beat him up. Hu Niu declared angrily. Her ferocious nature was on full throttle, and she bared her teeth, showing 2 tiny canines. Ling Han stopped the little girl and said, "Let me." "You? You would not hold up to 3 moves from me." Xikong Hao increased the intensity of his provocation. Ling Han was not angered in the slightest, because it was naturally not worth getting angry at the words of this kind of person. He smiled faintly, and shot out a punch at Sikong Hao. Wang wang wang, multiple seals appeared on his right hand, and his punch seemed capable of shattering the universe. You will collapse at the first blow. Sikong Hao similarly shot out a punch in response. Pang! Their two fists crashed into each other, and the light of regulations instantly exploded. Ling Han retreated continuously for 7 steps, and then steadied his footing. With a smile, he retorted, "You're nothing more than this." Sikong Hao did not step back. He had the upper hand in this clash, but his expression did not look happy at all, because this was completely different from the result that he had anticipated. A mere young soul, and he actually had such powerful battle prowess. Even Tian Qingyue showed a hint of seriousness. He would be able to suppress Sikong Hao with a single hand, and even facing Sikong Hao, Ling Han was inferior, so it was even more impossible that the latter was a match for him. But Ling Han was only just slightly inferior to Sikong Hao. This kind of battle prowess was really too astonishing, and even he was no more than this in the past. This was a super monarch tier whose natural talent in cultivation was definitely not inferior to his. Sikong Hao was first taken aback, and then flew into a humiliation-fueled fury. Ling Han actually dared to counter him with sarcastic mockery. Die! With a soft exclamation, Sikong Hao's fists moved continuously. 2-2-2. Every punch would shoot out a streak of light, and several hundred streaks of light were instantly descending on Ling Han, sealing off every route of retreat that was available to the latter. Chapter 2063. Battling Tian Qingyue. Boom, a blazing light surged past, and a massive turbulence appeared in the regulations of heaven and earth. This was the great clash of source powers. Aside from regulations of earth, the other 4 types of regulations were all intensely clashing. The might that was created from this explosion was incredibly frightening, and also affected the Tao of heaven and earth in the surroundings. Sikong Hao. He had already disappeared, his form and spirit both destroyed in this blow. A great heaven soul king tier, and he actually couldn't withstand a single blow from a young soul. Who could believe that? The iron rules of cultivation had determined that Sikong Hao would have been able to kill Ling Han in 2 to 3 moves, but now the tables were turned. This was extremely inconceivable. How could there be such a powerful young soul? Tian Qingyue's gaze immediately turned harsh, and was covered with a layer of haze. Just now, the fact that Ling Han's performance had been slightly inferior to Sikong Hao's had already made him feel that Ling Han's strength had caught up to his from when he had been at this stage, which also mean that if Ling Han's cultivation level was presently also Heaven's Soul, the two of them would be equals. Of course, Tian Qingyue definitely had strong confidence in himself, and thought that he would still be capable of being slightly superior. But Ling Han actually killed Sikong Hao with a single bow, which was enough to match Tian Qingyue's present strength. This had also shattered his self-confidence. He did not think that he would have been able to do so when he had been a young soul himself. He could not do this, but Ling Han could. So wasn't this difference obvious enough? He was actually inferior to Ling Han, inferior to a guy that he had previously looked down on. He looked down on Ling Han, so wouldn't he have been disdaining himself even more? How dare you? Behind Tian Qingyue, a follower came back out of his shock, and immediately shouted at Ling Han, pointing a finger at him. Not only was he a heaven's soul, he was also an emperor tier. If he was being honest, he was definitely no match for Ling Han's previous explosive attack, but even if he had taken on this attack head-on, he would only have sustained minor injury. It was definitely impossible that he would have been killed. Thus, he had enough confidence to rebuke Ling Han. As long as he could block a few blows from Ling Han, Tian Qingyue naturally would stand up for him. Sikong was only sparring with you, yet you dealt him a deadly attack. That is too cruel. He continued. Oh! Ling Han shook his head. At the beginning, Sikong Hao had indeed merely wanted to humiliate him, but by the second move, he had already shown his killing intent, so how could this possibly still be a spar? You guys want to kick me around, and distort the truth deliberately? I have killed him anyways, so what about it? Ling Han's tone was very forceful. Since you guys were being so overbearing, there was no reason for him to step back either. A person who kills needs to pay with his life, that follower declared menacingly. Pay with your life, the other followers similarly called out loudly. Tian Qingyue did not speak, but his gaze was very harsh as killing intent surged from him. If Ling Han's battle prowess was only like what it had been at the start, then he would disdain from dealing with Ling Han with how proud he was. That was because it was definitely he that would win in a battle of equal cultivation levels. But now that he had witnessed Ling Han's true battle prowess, Tian Qingyue was not as confident in himself as he had once been. In a battle of equal cultivation levels, he would definitely lose. To say nothing of equal cultivation levels, Ling Han only had to advance into Yin Soul, and he would probably be able to suppress Tian Qingyue. This was really him overthinking things. That was because Ling Han had used the great clash of source powers. The might would increase accordingly as his cultivation level increased, but it was mainly still restricted to the major tier he was in. The change in battle prowess brought about by a minor level was not very apparent. Thus, even if Ling Han advanced into Yin Soul, he would still be unable to suppress Tian Qingyue easily. Even if he was an Earth Soul, he could not do so. Only after he himself had reached Heaven Soul would he be able to. No one can kill my people, and leave completely without a look back. Tian Qingyue spoke up. You commit suicide. At least you will be able to ensure your corpse is whole. Ling Han laughed loudly. I have just killed a dog that only knows to bark madly. What's the big deal? You are only seeking your own death like this. Tian Qingyue humphed, and in a flash, he already appeared in front of Ling Han. Stretching out his hand, his 5 fingers grabbed out at Ling Han's throat. He was a Heaven Soul Monarch tier. This grab was both quick and ruthless, with frightening power of regulation surging in his strike. Even an Emperor tier at Heaven Soul would be instantly suppressed by this kind of regulations, being completely destroyed and corrupted. Ling Han did not hesitate the slightest. With his soft exclamation, the great clash of source powers was activated, and a terrifying storm of energy exploded from his chest. Tian Qingyue had clearly witnessed how terrifying the great clash of source powers could be, yet did not look like he was going to retreat in the slightest. His right hand was still in its original position, tackling the great clash of source powers head-on. Boom! 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 The power of regulation surged out madly, turning into multiple astonishing seals that glowed and dimmed, and were incredibly bright in their brilliance. Ling Han and Tian Qingyue were both sent several hundred meters back, but in the next instant, they both charged back, and an intense exchange of blows unfolded. The heaven and earth were forcibly ripped, showing multiple tears in space. It was like the whole world had become inky black, but every time the two great monarch tiers clashed, an incredibly brilliant light would surge out, lighting up the whole universe. Everyone was completely stunned and dazzled by the scene. Had this kind of battle really exploded between two dividing soul tiers? It was probable that even the power of Immortal Palace tier was only like this as well. Those 8 followers of Tian Qingyue felt their scalps grow numb. Their mouths gaped widely, but they could not spit out a single word. This was too stunning. That guy that was fighting on equal terms with Tian Qingyue was only a mere young soul. For a young soul to be able to match a heaven soul, this was already something that came out of fantasies, and only those very rare super monarch tiers like Tian Qingyue and Xiaofan would be able to do so. But the person that Ling Han was fighting was no ordinary heavenly emperor, but a supreme monarch tier like Tian Qingyue. Monster, he was such a freak. The two great monarch tiers battled fiercely. Their figures flashed, and even an ordinary heaven soul would feel their eyes blur and an urge to vomit arise upon seeing this kind of battle. Pa, blood splattered. There was Ling Han's blood, and there was also Tian Qingyue's. The 8 great followers were all astounded. Tian Qingyue had actually sustained injury. This arrogant super monarch tier actually would get injured as well. After exchanging several hundred blows, the two great monarch tiers stepped to the side, and were separated by about 60 meters. They faced each other, but made no further move. Tian Qingyue did not make a move, because now he was more familiar with Ling Han than others. This man's physique was practically tough to a chilling extent. And the reason why Ling Han had not made a move was because the exertion of his origin power and spirit was very great, and he could no longer channel the great clash of source powers. Thus, they only faced each other. Lord Tian actually can't do anything to this guy. He is just a mere young soul. Heavens, how could there be such a freak? I am about to go crazy. The 8 followers were all exclaiming in shock while grabbing their heads, filled with absolute disbelief. I will spare your life this once, and will definitely demand it in future, Tian Qingyue declared menacingly. Ha! Ling Han scoffed. In a battle of equal cultivation levels, it would be a piece of cake for me to kill you. Tian Qingyue's aura had weakened, and this was an incredibly striking reality. The space for Ling Han's growth was far superior to his. However, in the blink of an eye, his killing intent blazed again. This kind of terrifying opponent really had to be killed as soon as possible, or there could possibly be no chance to do so in future. And right at this moment, a group of people were walking over to the canyon, and the person in the lead was a captivatingly exquisite and graceful beauty. Chapter 2064. All arrived. It was Zhu Huiyun. Ling Han had come up with the idea of looking for heavenly dragon bone ashes here, so there was no reason that others would not have the same idea. Wasn't it so? Tian Qingyue had come, and Zhu Huiyun had also arrived. When he saw Zhu Huiyun, Tian Qingyue couldn't help but withdraw his gaze. He had no wish to lose his composure in front of this old rival. Celestial Maiden Zhu, that's him. Behind Zhu Huiyun, a green-robed man pointed at Ling Han. What are you pointing at me for? Ling Han tossed a glare at that person, his gaze a little fierce. It could not be helped. He had just been in a fight, and it was with a powerful enemy like Tian Qingyue at that. His energy was all maintained at the most alert and peak stage. I heard Zhu say that you stimulated the Black Dragon Bridge? Zhu Huiyun spoke up, directing a question at Ling Han. What? Tian Qingyue exclaimed in spite of himself. How is this possible? The Black Dragon Bridge was also called the most venerable divine path. It had never been trodden by anyone since the 100 Dragons Mystery Realm first appeared. This was also called an impossible miracle, and only the most venerable master of the heaven and earth could manage to conquer it. However, a 9th heaven celestial king would only be equal to the heaven and earth, so how could there possibly emerge a venerate that surpassed the heaven and earth? Tian Qingyue realized that he had lost his composure, and hurriedly shut his mouth. He looked at Ling Han, the jealousy in his eyes even more apparent than before. Though there had never been one before, Tian Qingyue did not think that Zhu Huiyun had made a mistake. Ling Han's strength had reached an inconceivable extent. Even while he was only at Yang Soul, he could match Tian Qingyue. This had far surpassed the capacity of a monarch tier, so it was logical that he had been able to stimulate the most venerable divine path. Why did this kind of honor not belong to him instead? Tian Qingyue clenched his fists tightly, forcibly suppressing the urge to make a move. Meanwhile, Ling Han glanced at Zhu Huiyun. He had not made contact with this female monarch tier before. He nodded and replied, "That's right. There were too many people that had witnessed this scene. There was no need for him to hide that fact, nor could he do so." Zhu Huiyun nodded and then continued, "My master has made a prediction before that if the most venerable divine path is stimulated, one can obtain blooms of Tao upon it. I am sure Brother Ling too has obtained a harvest, right?" Ling Han's eyes involuntarily narrowed. This woman's master was most likely also a 9th heaven celestial king. At least, he had to be an 8th heaven celestial king. Otherwise, he could not have possibly been able to predict this kind of secret of heaven and earth. Ling Han declined to comment, and only smiled faintly. This had already touched on personal secrets. There was absolutely no need for him to answer this kind of question. "I would like to ask Brother Ling to part with some, and sell me 10 blooms of Tao," Zhu Huiyun said. This was really a very large appetite. Ling Han had only obtained 17 blooms of Tao in total, and then after sharing with the 3 women, each person would only have 5 on average. And this Zhu Huiyun demanded 10 from the very start. Even if Ling Han had not shared with the 3 women, after selling to Zhu Huiyun, the number of blooms of Tao in his possession would still be the minority. Most importantly, blooms of Tao were not like dragon crystals, and were even more valuable, so how could their value be measured in starstones? It should be known that this was a treasure that could only be obtained when one stepped onto the Black Dragon Bridge. In a whole epoch, only Ling Han and Ji Wuming had managed to accomplish that. Ling Han shook his head. What bloom of Tao? I have never seen such a thing. Brother Ling, you are really being unfriendly here. Zhu Huiyun's pretty face darkened slightly, not angry but still intimidating. When a monarch tear became angered, even the weather would change. Who do you think you are? The Empress spoke up, an endless dignity rippling out. Though her cultivation level was not very high, her aura was definitely astonishingly strong. It was inborn for her, and no one would be able to copy that even if they wanted to. Zhu Huiyun had already been a little angered, and now a further layer of cold ice came over the expression on her pretty face. She pointed a finger at the Empress and demanded, "You actually dare act insolent towards me? It was you who delivered your own face to ask for a beating," Ling Han countered calmly. "I am not in the habit of hitting women, but if you continue to pester me, I will not be reserved either." Hee hee. Do you think that you can be invincible in this world just because you have stimulated the most venerable divine path? Zhu Huiyun asked in disdain. Cultivation level was a glaring shortcoming. There was a total gap of 3 minor levels between them, and taking into account her status as a monarch tier, that would be 5 levels. What right did Ling Han have to make such a threat? Even if Ling Han had stepped onto the most venerable divine path, he would only be able to surpass 4 levels at most. Zhu Huiyun, don't underestimate this person, Tian Qingyue spoke up, his expression grim. Let's work together, and then we'll share the blooms of Tao between us equally. Zhu Huiyun was taken aback and then blurted out, "You have already exchanged blows with him?" If that had not been the case, why else would he have suggested joining forces? Hold on, Tian Qingyue definitely had to have been unable to apprehend Ling Han. Heavens, this guy was only a mere young soul. She had underestimated him, she really had. How could someone who had managed to step onto the most venerable divine path be judged with conventional reasoning? Though Tian Qingyue was not willing to admit it, he firstly wanted to kill Ling Han, and secondly, he also wanted to obtain the blooms of Tao, so after a slight pause, he still nodded his head in admission. Though Zhu Huiyun had long since guessed that, when she saw Tian Qingyue admitted of his own volition, she still couldn't help but feel a jolt in her heart. There was actually such a heaven-defying person in this world. Immediately, a powerful killing intent radiated from her. If she did not get rid of this kind of prodigy, she would not be able to rest easy. Fine, we'll work together to eliminate this person. Her personality was incredibly decisive, and she immediately came to a decision. Tian Qingyue nodded. He couldn't kill Ling Han on his own, but it was highly possible now that Zhu Huiyun was added into the equation, they could capture Ling Han, and then forcibly refine Ling Han using regulations like a cauldron. Under the crushing pressure of the Tao of heaven and earth, no matter how tough his physique was, it would be completely useless. The two super monarch tiers both showed an intense killing intent. The number of times they had worked together with another person was pitifully few. What more when it was to deal with a person who was inferior to themselves by 3 minor levels? If this was known to others, there would definitely not be a single person who would believe it. Xiao. Right at this moment, a figure suddenly sped over from the distance. He was moving astonishingly quickly, and there were 2 other people behind him whose speed was similarly overwhelmingly fast. The person at the forefront immediately stopped, and asked Ling Han, "What is it? Gotten into some trouble?" It was Ji Wuming. Ling Han was just about to speak when he saw the 2 people behind Ji Wuming had also stopped. These 2 people were Xiaofan and Yu Huaqing. The super monarch tiers that had entered this space had actually all arrived in unison. "Why aren't you running anymore?" Xiaofan asked coldly. These words were directed at Ji Wuming. Ji Wuming glanced at him and scoffed, "I just can't bother myself to tangle with you guys. Did you think I was afraid of you?" Hee hee, what arrogant words. The corners of Yu Huaqing's lips crooked up in a grin, his demeanor very arrogant. Meanwhile, Tian Qingyue and Zhu Huiyun were both a little confused. The 2 great monarch tiers that were their equals were actually pursuing Ji Wuming together, while the former 2 were presently just planning to join forces to take Ling Han down, and it just so happened that Ling Han and Ji Wuming seemed to know each other. When they mulled this over, it seemed quite strange. Yet Ling Han came to a realization. These two people also covet your blooms of Tao. Just two clowns, Ji Wuming stated calmly. In the whole world, only Ling Han was worthy of being considered as a rival by him at present. So what if Yu Huaqing's and Xia Hotong's cultivation level was higher than his? In the past, he had been a ninth heaven celestial king, and stood at the apex of the celestial path. He had seen too many so-called supreme prodigies like Yu Huaqing and Xia Hotong, and also killed too many of them, so how could they possibly cause a stir in his heart? Hearing Ling Han say this, Tian Qingyue, Xia Hotong, and the others also came to a realization. As it turned out, their goal was the same. It was just that their targets differed. Then we won't interfere with each other. Chapter 2065. Battle of Monarch Tears. Not to interfere with each other. This was extremely simple. Zhu Huiyun and Tian Qingyue would continue to battle against Ling Han, while Xia Hotong and Yu Huaqing would continue to keep an eye on Ji Wuming. Meanwhile, they would naturally keep their own share of spoils. Neither of them would target the other. Agreed, the four monarchs said with a nod. A baleful smile spread across Ji Wuming's face. He had slain many ninth heaven celestial kings in the past, so what were these mere heaven soul cultivators to him? Even though Tian Qingyue and the others were all regarded as paramount monarchs, their talent was only so in Ji Wuming's eyes. After all, which of them could become a fifth heaven celestial king? Even if they could become an eighth heaven celestial king, this still wasn't enough for Ji Wuming to take them seriously. To challenge his will? Die. Initially, I didn't want to argue with you trash. However, you people insist on seeking death? Ji Wuming said in a baleful voice. Killing intent exuded from his eyes. You're truly as arrogant as can be, Yu Huaqing said in an icy voice. Enough with the nonsense. Deh. Xia Hotong was filled with impatience. In his eyes, a measly earth soul cultivator could be killed with a wave of his hand. If it weren't for the fact that Ji Wuming was so good at fleeing, how could he have survived until now? However, did being good at fleeing represent that he was good at fighting? Naturally not. The two of them immediately lashed out, with their attacks being as vicious as could be. They wanted to kill Ji Wuming with a single blow. This wasn't because they respected Ji Wuming's strength, but it was because they were afraid that he would move first. Thus, they needed to strike first and strike hard. They were going to snatch Ji Wuming's spatial storage tool. After all, they would only trust themselves to go through his spatial storage tool. Fools! Ji Wuming said with a sneer. His body suddenly moved like a flash of light as he charged towards Xia Hotong. Boom! 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 A violent battle immediately erupted. Ji Wuming was truly ferocious, and he was taking the initiative to attack even though he was fighting against two opponents. As he channeled his celestial techniques, his battle prowess was as overwhelming as the heavens. Even though he was at a numerical disadvantage, he wasn't being suppressed at all. This naturally astounded Xia Hotong and Yu Huaqing. Just like how Tian Qingyue had been stunned by Ling Han just then, the two of them hadn't imagined that a young soul cultivator could possibly be so powerful. However, they immediately composed themselves after a few exchanges. Ji Wuming was indeed powerful. However, he was still limited by his cultivation level. In fact, he was only so powerful because of his intricate grasp of regulations. Because of this, he could unleash greater power from celestial techniques. Meanwhile, the celestial techniques of his opponents would become noticeably weaker. With his attacks strengthened and the attacks of his opponents weakened, he could surprisingly overcome a disadvantage of 3 minor levels. No. In fact, the combination of Xia Hotong and Yu Huaqing was still slightly more powerful. However, they definitely couldn't suppress and capture Ji Wuming in a short amount of time. Thus, this became an intense battle that wouldn't conclude any time soon. On the other side, Tian Qingyue and Zhu Huiyun were battling against Ling Han. They also couldn't gain a noticeable upper hand, and this was because Ling Han's great clash of source powers could specifically cause great damage and destruction to a certain area. Regardless of how many opponents he faced, anyone who entered the range of this attack would be struck. Thus, as long as Ling Han didn't become exhausted, he could exert a similar amount of pressure on both Tian Qingyue and Zhu Huiyun. Both battles were remarkably intense and vicious. In fact, just a single shock wave from these battles could easily annihilate an ordinary Heaven Soul cultivator. The spectating followers were deeply shocked by what they saw. Meanwhile, Yu Huaqing and Xia Hotong naturally had their own subordinates as well. However, they had arrived slightly later. Even so, they were still completely stunned by the scenes that welcomed them. The four most powerful youths of the Universal Peace Heaven were actually teaming up to battle against two people. Heavens! Who could believe this? Ling Han, let's team up as well. Ji Wuming suddenly said. He was not one to make meaningless remarks. As he finished speaking, he had already launched a palm strike that transformed into two black swords that slashed at Tian Qingyue and Zhu Huiyun. Ling Han initially thought that he was hearing things. However, upon seeing Ji Wuming's attack, he naturally wouldn't doubt his own eyes as well. Ji Wuming genuinely wanted to team up with him. Ling Han was astonished, yet this didn't affect his reaction. He also launched two punches, activating his great clash of source powers, and unleashing a devastating attack at Tian Qingyue and Zhu Huiyun. When Xia Hotong and Yu Huaqing arrived before him, he actively charged forward to block their attacks with his body. Pang pang! The attacks of the two monarch tears struck Ling Han in unison. However, Ling Han was merely sent flying back, and he didn't even spit a single drop of blood. Xia Hotong and Yu Huaqing's eyes widened in shock. Their attacks had struck Ling Han head-on, yet he hadn't even spit a single drop of blood. This was unbelievable. However, they were monarch tears, after all, so they quickly regained their composure. They continued to charge at Ji Wuming. Just then, they had already agreed not to interfere with each other's battles. They couldn't steal each other's prey. It was pretty much the same with Tian Qingyue and Zhu Huiyun, who continued to target Ling Han. However, because of this, Ling Han and Ji Wuming now had a significant advantage. They each had two people who wouldn't attack them. Meanwhile, because they had teamed up, they could essentially battle against their opponents 2-on-2. This allowed them to largely eliminate their disadvantage. Let's stop restricting ourselves. Zhu Huiyun roared. Even though she was a woman, she was even more resolute than most men. Let's work together to kill these two people. Even though it was 4 against 2 right now, each pair of them was only focusing on their own opponent. Thus, they weren't exactly working together. Agreed. Tian Qingyue and the others said with a nod. Monarch tears were naturally resolute people. Upon teaming up, their battle prowess instantly surged by a significant amount. I'll take care of defending. You focus on attacking. Ling Han roared. All right. Ji Wuming immediately replied with a decisive nod. Ling Han summoned his divided soul, and stopped unleashing his great clash of source powers. Instead, he started to act as a human shield, blocking all of his opponent's attacks. Of course, it was naturally impossible to block all of their attacks, but he could still block a large portion of them. With Ji Wuming's strength, he could naturally deal with the attacks that slipped through. With the pressure eased, he could more so draw on his full power to unleash powerful attacks. Just how terrifying was Ji Wuming if he didn't need to focus on his defenses? This was simply indescribable. His battle experience was far superior to that of Tian Qingyue and the others. In fact, he was more than 100 million times more experienced. His attacks flowed like water, and there were no crevices that they couldn't enter. His ability to seize opportunities and create opportunities was more so something that Tian Qingyue and the others couldn't hope to compare to. Without needing to worry about his defenses, it was as if Ji Wuming had become the sharpest blade in the world. Tian Qingyue and the others roared in fury as they felt a devastating pressure sweep over them. Kill him first! They shouted as they glared at Ji Wuming. However, it was a shame that Ling Han was there to block their attacks. Relying on the regulations of time and the regulations of space, he continued to use himself as a human shield, blocking almost all of their attacks. Tian Qingyue and the others were completely unable to touch Ji Wuming. Ha 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 ha! Ji Wuming roared with laughter, and his attacks became increasingly smooth and vicious. He was truly a strange person. After teaming up with Ling Han, it was clear that he had placed all of his trust in Ling Han, completely ignoring all of the incoming attacks. He focused his full effort on unleashing powerful attacks. Ling Han couldn't help but feel slightly surprised. However, he also felt extremely thrilled at this moment. Fighting alongside such a partner was truly an amazing feeling. Chapter 2066. Cooperation of Ling Han and Ji Wuming. By teaming up, Ling Han and Ji Wuming had essentially become the sturdiest shield and sharpest spear in the world. This was a perfect team. Even though Tian Qingyue and the others were top-notch monarch tiers, and even though they had a significant advantage in cultivation level, they were still helpless against Ling Han's incredibly powerful physique. Meanwhile, Ji Wuming's attacks were like relentless waves that surged forth one after another. His attacks were like water that penetrated every single gap. The four monarch tiers were in a miserable and disheveled state. Surprisingly, all of them were already drenched in blood. Ji Wuming had grasped heaven knew how many powerful celestial techniques, and thus he was able to wantonly unleash them one after another. This caused the monarch tiers to face a mountain load of pressure. Defense! Focus on defense! Tian Qingyue hurriedly shouted. Otherwise, they would be on the back foot and face continuous attacks from Ji Wuming. If this continued, they would eventually be exhausted to death. The four monarch tiers immediately joined hands to defend, and this greatly improved their situation. Regardless of how powerful Ji Wuming's attacks were, how could he possibly breach the combined defenses of four monarch tiers? After all, Ji Wuming was only at Yang's soul. If he were at Heaven's soul, and if he didn't need to concentrate on defending, he would definitely be able to shatter the combined defenses of the four monarch tiers with ease. Upon focusing on defense, the four monarch tiers managed to immediately stabilize their situation. They then started to plan a counterattack. This was a great test for Ling Han. Just then, they had been mindlessly attacking, so Ling Han had also been able to mindlessly defend. In any case, he would simply block any attack that came his way. Now, however, the four monarch tiers were only launching attacks from time to time. This was, in fact, even harder to defend against. Ling Han needed to be completely focused. Otherwise, if he allowed an attack to strike Ji Wuming, that might lead to great catastrophe. Ling Han couldn't help but feel strange. In the past, he and Ji Wuming had always been trying to kill each other. Moreover, their killing intent had been extremely resolute. Now, however, they were happily teaming up with each other, and Ji Wuming was even entrusting his back to Ling Han. This was something that Ling Han could never have dreamed of. Do you think this is useful? Ji Wuming asked in a baleful voice. He shook his right hand, drawing a sword that was radiating with an ice-cold aura. Celestial Tool, Severed Passion Sword. Whoosh! The sword slashed down, with its might shaking the heavens. This was a celestial tool, so even if it hadn't awakened, just its sharpness alone was already enough to greatly threaten those under the level of Celestial King. Unless one were significantly more powerful, and unless they could knock the celestial tool out of their opponent's hand with a single strike, this would be an unbelievably powerful and deadly weapon. Was Ling Han's physique powerful enough? Yet, he still didn't dare to let himself be struck by the severed passion sword. The sword slashed down, and the expressions of the four monarch tiers changed drastically. They frantically shot back in retreat. Just what kind of fucking pseudo-celestial tool was this? How was it so terrifying? No, this isn't a pseudo-celestial tool. It's a genuine celestial tool. Tian Qingyue suddenly exclaimed in astonishment. What? Xiaofan and the others were stunned upon hearing this. A celestial tool. Celestial tools were treasures that uniquely belonged to celestial kings. In fact, some celestial kings didn't even own any celestial tools. Only powerful celestial kings could possibly own such a weapon. This was a symbol of status and power. Now, however, a measly young soul cultivator actually possessed a celestial tool. Who could believe this? Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. The severed passion sword continued to slash down, sending waves of sword chi through the air. The might of this sword chi was no weaker than the might of the blade itself. The combined defense of the four monarch tiers was instantly shattered. Like a husband and wife facing great calamity, they each fled their own separate ways. Who could resist the might of a celestial tool? Of course, this was unless an immortal palace tier elite arrived. They didn't need to be at the 4th secret or 5th secret, and they simply needed to be at the 1st secret. After all, immortal palace tier elites possessed a crushing advantage over dividing soul tier cultivators. What did it matter that the 4 monarch tiers were extremely powerful? Before a 1st secret elite, they couldn't even block a single attack. Similarly, the attack of a 1st secret elite could instantly knock the celestial sword from Ji Wuming's hand. No, with a single punch, Ji Wuming would immediately be reduced into a cloud of blood, upon which his celestial tool would clatter on the ground. Now, however, the 4 monarch tiers could only flee in disarray. With Ling Han acting as a human shield, they simply had no way of attacking and suppressing Ji Wuming. Apart from fleeing, what else could they do? The eyes of their followers widened in shock and disbelief. How was this possible? Just how in the world was this possible? In terms of cultivation level, the 4 monarch tiers were all at Heaven Soul, which possessed a crushing advantage over Yang Soul. In terms of natural talent, Tian Qingyue and the others were all top-notch monarch tiers. Thus, how could they be surpassed? Meanwhile, in terms of numbers, they were also enjoying an advantage of 4 to 2. Yet, even so, they were still suppressed and forced to scurry around like rats. They were like dogs without a home. Heavens! Ling Han and Ji Wuming were far too powerful. As expected of paramount prodigies who had ascended the most venerable divine path, they had forcefully turned an impossibility into a possibility. When the 4 monarch tiers had ascended the Golden Dragon Bridge, one of them had the potential to become an 8th heaven celestial king. Now, however, even the most venerable divine path had been triggered, and it had more so been triggered by 2 people. Just what kind of devastating individuals would they become? The onlookers could only draw a sharp breath. Their heads were numb with shock. Perhaps they were witnessing the rise of 2 paramount emperors. Retreat! The 4 monarch tiers abandoned any remaining hope. They couldn't breach Ling Han's defenses, and they were also being completely smashed by Ji Wuming's attacks. As such, what was the point of continuing this battle? Xiao. Tian Qingyue and the others fled in 4 separate directions. Ling Han and Ji Wuming didn't chase after them. First of all, their speed was similar, so they couldn't necessarily catch up anyway. Second of all, this was potentially a trap set up by the 4 monarch tiers. It was possible that they would fall into a trap if they gave chase. Ling Han, if it weren't for the fact that I have a strong reason to kill you, I would have truly wanted to become friends with you, Ji Wuming said as he sheathed his severed passion sword. He didn't seize this opportunity to attack Ling Han. Ling Han smiled and said, "Same." The battle just then had truly been thrilling and mesmerizing. "Next time we meet, I'll unleash my full power to kill you," Ji Wuming said, his voice suddenly turning cold. His eyes were radiating with powerful killing intent. "You better pray that you won't be crushed into oblivion by me," Ling Han retorted. He didn't back down at all. Ji Wuming roared with laughter. He wasn't sneering at Ling Han's audacity, but he was instead appreciating the strength and resolve of his opponent. He flicked his sleeves and walked into the canyon. Ling Han gazed at his disappearing figure for a moment before saying, "Let's enter as well." The Empress and the others nodded in reply, and their eyes were filled with emotion as they gazed at Ling Han. This man was far too mighty and domineering. This caused their hearts to flutter in excitement. In fact, they felt a powerful urge to leap into his embrace, and they yearned for him to passionately kiss them and make love with them. The 4 of them entered the canyon. However, they didn't follow Ji Wuming. This canyon was extremely large, so there was absolutely no need to choose the same path. Whoosh! Only after entering the canyon did they realize just how powerful the wind was. While standing outside the canyon just then, they had only been able to sense a wisp of the wind's might. Now, however, they could feel the vicious intent of the wind. With each gust of wind, rocks and dust would surge through the surroundings. It was as if some elite had launched a powerful attack. Moreover, even with Ling Han's powerful physique, he still couldn't help but feel pain from the violently flying rocks. After facing several hits head-on, he didn't dare to expose himself anymore. He activated a movement technique, and started to dance around the flying rocks. Meanwhile, they also had to collect these flying rocks as the latter might possess traces of heavenly dragon bone ashes. However, with the relentless gusts of vicious winds, it was truly hard to collect the rocks. Trying to grab these rocks was like trying to face the powerful attack of an elite head-on. It would shake them to the core and make them want to spit blood. Thus, Ling Han and the others only managed to roam around the canyon for a single day. Afterward, they had no choice but to return to the Azure Dragon Town to rest. Chapter 2067. Counterattack of the Four Monarch Tears. After returning to the Azure Dragon Town, Ling Han asked the villagers some questions again. Only then did he realize that he had been slightly misled. One could indeed find heavenly dragon bone ashes in that canyon. Moreover, that canyon was also the best place to search for heavenly dragon bone ashes. However, this was entirely time-dependent. During an entire year, there would only be 3 or so days when the canyon would become calm, without a single gust of wind. At that time, it would be extremely easy to enter and search for heavenly dragon bone ashes. After this time, however, the canyon would become chaotic with violent wind. In fact, even immortal palace tier elites would cry in pain if they were struck by the flying rocks. Ling Han couldn't help but sigh with emotion. This place was isolated from the outside world, yet even so, the people were still unable to maintain their innocence. They were also cunning, and they would also play tricks on others. Anyhow, the 3 calm days definitely weren't now. Instead, it had been during the time that they had been fighting. Thus, there was simply no way that they could obtain any heavenly dragon bone ashes. Meanwhile, news of Ling Han and Ji Wuming's battle against the 4 monarch tiers also started to spread. In the beginning, no one believed this news. Wasn't this a joke? Just what kind of beings were the 4 monarch tiers? Any single one of them could easily crush all of the other outsiders. However, when it was revealed that Ling Han and Ji Wuming had walked across the most venerable divine path, many people instantly believed this news. That was the most venerable divine path. This was a path that had never been traversed before. In fact, even that paramount prodigy in the past, the one who had become an 8th heaven celestial king, had only managed to ascend a golden dragon bridge. Thus, what kind of concept was ascending the most venerable divine path? Were they destined to become 9th heaven celestial kings? Or were they destined to become rulers among 9th heaven celestial kings? However, the powerful image of the 4 monarch tiers was already deeply ingrained in everyone's mind. Thus, there were still many people who refused to believe this news. They were adamant that this was a rumor used to slander and shake the leadership of the 4 powerful monarch tiers. Ling Han had no intention of becoming a leader and whatnot, so he naturally couldn't be bothered explaining himself. He left the others to argue among themselves. 3 days passed, and the 4 monarch tier finally made a decision. They chose to ally with some tribe. After another day, Ling Han suddenly realized that he and the Empress surprisingly hadn't signed a contract with any of the tribes yet. If they didn't sign a contract, they couldn't represent a tribe in battle. What's going on? He went over to ask, only to learn that he, the Empress, and Ji Wuming had all been kicked out from the alliance. Heh! Ling Han immediately chuckled. Perhaps Tian Qingyue and the others wanted to target him and Ji Wuming in the following battle between tribes. By expelling them from the alliance, even if Ling Han and the others found another tribe to ally with, they would still be at a numerical disadvantage at that time. Moreover, this would be a severe numerical disadvantage. They would be outnumbered at least 100 to 1. That being the case, even if Ling Han and Ji Wuming teamed up, could they hope to achieve victory? Ling Han shook his head. Who had come up with this plan? Did they really think it would work? If he and Ji Wuming both chose to join the same tribes as Tian Qingyue and the others, wouldn't his plan have come undone? Ling Han pondered this for a moment. Even though he was aware of these people's plans, he still wouldn't choose to join the same tribes as them. This was for his pride, if not for nothing else. Do you think I'm afraid of you? Ling Han knew that it was unhelpful to act rashly at this moment. However, he couldn't suppress his pride no matter what. Moreover, he recalled the words of the elder that Du Xiaojun had mentioned before. Joining the powerful side didn't necessarily guarantee victory. By the looks of things right now, the side with the 4 monarch tiers definitely possessed an advantage. No matter how one looked at it, Ling Han and the others were on the slightly weaker side. Even with Ji Wuming, they were still at a disadvantage. Was there still any doubt about the result? Ling Han, we're going to crush these people's *s, Hu Niu said in anger. She shook her dainty fists as she spoke. She was eager to pummel these people, especially since Ling Han always prevented her from crushing other people's *ses. She was feeling extremely rebellious at this moment. Ling Han couldn't help but grimace. He felt overwhelming regret for having destroyed someone's *s before Hu Niu before. Now, Hu Niu was always itching to replicate his feat. Alright, do what you want. However, you definitely have to use a staff, Ling Han said in a stern voice. Alright, Hu Niu answered in excitement. She clapped her hands in glee. The Empress and bewitching maiden Ro involuntarily shed cold sweat. Could this be regarded as a warning? One of them was unreliable, and the other was even more unreliable. They went to look for the elder of Azure Dragon Town. Regardless of whether they had a representative or not, they definitely had to sign the contract in person. This couldn't be done by a representative. When the 4 of them arrived at the Divine Temple, they saw Tian Qingyue and the other monarch tiers standing before the gates, wearing expressions of scorn and ridicule. Ling Han, we've all chosen to join the primordial Iron Tribe, Tian Qingyue suddenly said. What's the meaning of this? Ling Han came to a sudden realization. By telling them which tribe they had joined, they were trying to rile up Ling Han and the others. Even if Ling Han and the others wanted to join the same tribe, would they have the face to? In any case, there were hundreds of outsiders here, so it was naturally impossible to hide this news. Since that was the case, they decided to proudly reveal this to Ling Han. After learning of this, would he still have the face to join the same tribe? Could he stand to lose this face? Ugly B***tch, what are you being so arrogant for? Hu Niu glared at her and said, just you wait. In a moment, Niu will pummel all of you. Tian Qingyue and the others wore expressions of disdain. They were already aware that Hu Niu and the Empress had also triggered the Golden Dragon Bridges, meaning that their cultivation talent was on the same level. However, they possessed a crushing advantage of 3 minor levels. So which of them couldn't suppress Hu Niu and the Empress with ease? As such, did they need to pay any attention to them? However, the expressions of disdain immediately vanished from their faces. This wasn't because Hu Niu was baring her teeth at them. Instead, it was because a young man in white had walked over. Ji Wuming. This was a paramount prodigy that no one could ignore. In terms of offensive prowess alone, he was peerless in the world. Ling Han, are you interested in teaming up with me and slaying these weaklings again? Ji Wuming said with a smile. His teeth were sparkling white, and they were indescribably attractive. All right, Ling Han replied with a smile. He also wanted to pummel the 4 monarch tiers. Ji Wuming nodded in acknowledgement. He then gazed at the 4 monarch tiers, and his expression was as if he were looking at lambs ready for slaughter. The disdain on his face couldn't be hidden. One had to realize that Ji Wuming wasn't in his peak state right now. His divided soul hadn't entered this place, so he could only unleash 50% of his battle prowess. Then we'll eliminate you too when the battle begins, Xiaofan said in a calm voice. He was brimming with confidence. Make sure to clean your *s. Niu is going to obliterate all of your *ses. Hu Niu also said in a threatening voice. Tian Qingyue and the others almost tripped and fell upon hearing this. A mighty monarch tier was actually uttering such words? This was far too crude and uncouth. Moreover, she was also a breathtakingly beautiful woman. It was simply impossible to imagine such words coming from her mouth. You wait and see. The 4 monarch tiers didn't argue with them any longer. Against someone like Hu Niu, who dared to say anything, their battle prowess was truly insufficient. Ling Han smiled before entering the Divine Dragon Temple with the 3 women. Because most people had already chosen a tribe to ally with, the 7 large tribes were indifferent toward Ling Han and the others. After all, they couldn't change much regardless of which tribe they joined. Then we'll choose the Bronze Tribe, Ling Han said. Chapter 2068. Black Figures. The Bronze Tribe was the tribe of Old Monk Na Su. In the beginning, they had tried extremely hard to recruit Ling Han and the others, offering them many benefits. This time, however, the old monk couldn't even be bothered greeting the 5 of them. He sent a young subordinate over to dismiss them. The reason for this was very simple. The battle had yet to begin, yet the conclusion was already foregone. Old Monk Na Su was in a bad mood right now, so he naturally didn't want to meet with Ling Han and the others. However, Ling Han was filled with enthusiasm, and he started to chit-chat with the young subordinate. He then continued to propose an alliance. In the end, the Bronze Tribe couldn't endure Ling Han's relentless pursuit anymore, so they agreed to give Ling Han and the others enough heavenly dragon bone ashes. This would allow them to receive 10 times more benefits when they were instilled with power by the 100 dragons. This naturally came with conditions. Ling Han and the others couldn't receive the heavenly dragon bone ashes simply by participating in the battle. Rather, they could only receive these benefits if they helped the Bronze Tribe win a dragon pearl. If they succeeded, they could claim the rewards. In any case, there were only 5 of them, so the Bronze Tribe could definitely accept this exchange. Even so, the Bronze Tribe still didn't have much hope. After all, Ling Han and the others were facing far too great a disadvantage. Although there had been cases of underdogs winning in the past, the difference in power definitely hadn't been so great. The remaining 5 tribes naturally had an even smaller chance of winning. This was because they had no one to represent them in battle. This time, they could only act as spectators. Thus, in their eyes, the actions of Ling Han and the others were nothing but a huge joke. When news of this spread, the atmosphere of Azure Dragon Town instantly became carefree and joyous. Everyone was discussing this peculiar matter. This caused Hunyo and Bewitching Maiden Ro to feel pent up with anger. They vowed that they would definitely obliterate the A*SES of those people in the upcoming battle. Indeed, even Bewitching Maiden Ro started to go down this violent path. Although the Empress didn't speak, the fury in her eyes was also especially evident. It was amid such an atmosphere that the battle finally started. All of the outsiders were brought to a canyon, though this was not the same canyon as before. This was a long and narrow canyon that had 7 entrances in total. Each tribe had a canyon of their own, yet right now, only 2 of the tribes needed to participate in the battle. Moreover, no matter how one looked at it, the Bronze Tribe was simply participating with no chance of victory. They were simply here for show. Ling Han, Ji Wuming, and the others made their way to the entrance. However, a huge boulder blocked their path. This boulder was called Dragon Severing Stone, and it had rested here for hundreds of millions of years. Only when the battle started would this boulder automatically move aside. Otherwise, even ascending origin tier elites couldn't do anything about this boulder. Ling Han and the others stood before this boulder, silently waiting for it to move aside. The rules of the battle were extremely simple. They simply needed to battle for 10 days in a row. Afterward, the side with the most remaining people would be crowned the victor. It was also because of this rule that the side with the greater numbers would possess a huge advantage. Simply put, as long as they remained together and defended with all their might, they would easily win if more than 5 of them lasted until the end of the battle. "We need to unleash our full power to slaughter them," Ji Wuming said in a calm voice. The earth was also quaking, and it wasn't long before the gigantic boulder disappeared from sight. The battle of the 7 tribes had officially begun. Wang wang wang. Wisps of black air suddenly materialized beside Ling Han and the others. These wisps of black air then transformed into humanoid shapes, though they were devoid of facial features and legs. They only had long arms, and they hovered half a feet above the ground. What is this? Ling Han and the others instantly entered a defensive stance. Meanwhile, Hunyo dragged her finger across the air, unleashing a deadly burst of light that slashed at one of the black figures. Pooh! The burst of light slashed down, and a gaping hole instantly appeared in the black figure's chest. However, the black figure didn't disappear. Instead, it slowly gathered together again, returning to its original form. It continued to hover in the air. The black figures didn't launch a counterattack, and it was as if they were nothing more than hovering mist. Ling Han observed them carefully, only to discover an extremely faint symbol on the heads of these black figures. It was because the black air was slightly fainter in that region that he could see the symbols. He had seen this symbol before. It was the symbol of the Bronze Tribe. TSK, in other words, these black figures are on our side. Do they have any use? Can we use them to battle? Ling Han suddenly recalled Du Xiaojuan's words again. The more powerful side wouldn't necessarily win. Perhaps it was because of these black figures. Whoosh! The black figures suddenly started to hover forward. Follow them. The 5 of them followed the black figures. If they continued forward, they would eventually reach the central region of the canyon. It was the same for all of the 7 paths. They converged at the center, where the 7 tribes would then descend into an intense battle. Ling Han looked around, and he saw that there were around 200 to 300 black figures in total. This was essentially the same as the total number of outsiders. TSK, is this to make up for our disadvantage in numbers? Is this why there's a saying that the more powerful side won't necessarily win? This was extremely likely. That being the case, these black figures were definitely very powerful. Otherwise, if they were easily destroyed, what would be the point of giving them these black figures? Ling Han carefully counted the number of black figures. There were 232 of them in total. In that case, he would count the number of their opponents in a while. In any case, the answer was going to reveal itself soon. They continued forward, and it wasn't long before they arrived at the central region of the canyon. This was a large expanse of flat land, and there were 7 entrances in total. When Ling Han and the others arrived, a large group of people also charged out from the entrance 2 others away from them. This was none other than Tian Qingyue and the others. At almost the same moment, 5 groups of black figures also hovered out from the remaining 5 entrances. Their number was clear at first glance. Each group consisted of precisely 237 figures. Ling Han glanced over Tian Qingyue and the others, and their total number immediately appeared in his mind. OL start equals 237. In other words, upon entering the canyon, the groups with fewer people would receive these black figures to make up for the difference. Thus, Ling Han and the others had received 232 black figures. Adding the 5 of them, they numbered precisely 237. At this moment, Tian Qingyue and the others also noticed the existence of the black figures. They all wore expressions of astonishment. What in the world is this? Right at this moment, however, all of the black figures started to move. Some of them charged at Tian Qingyue, while some of them charged at Ling Han and the others. In complete contrast to their passive behavior from before, they were now filled with vigor and liveliness. They were brimming with killing intent, and it was as if they would charge forward even if they were facing an army of tens of thousands. Boom! The first black figure arrived before them, reaching over to grab Ling Han. Its arms were filled with black-veined patterns, and these patterns were exuding an ice-cold aura that instilled apprehension in one's mind. Ling Han humphed as he replied with a punch of his own. Chapter 2069. Might. Pang. With a single punch from Ling Han, the black figure was instantly smashed into pieces. However, to his surprise, the black figure started to rapidly regather and reform. It then swung its long arm, striking at his back. Are these black figures undying monsters? Ling Han leaped to the side, dodging this attack. Meanwhile, he started to analyze the situation in his mind. The battle prowess of these black figures was at Earth Soul. Although they couldn't rival supreme monarch tiers such as Tian Qingyue, or even ordinary monarch tiers such as Du Xiaojun, they still posed a huge threat to those with a battle prowess under the level of Earth Soul. This was because they couldn't be destroyed. Ah! Agonized screams started to resound through the air. These were the screams of people who had underestimated the danger posed by the black figures. They had thought that they could destroy them with a single strike. In the end, however, they had ended up being killed instead. Ling Han immediately adjusted his opinion of the black figures. They were undying Earth Soul beings, so they would pose a huge threat even to Heaven Soul cultivators. Just then, he had witnessed several Heaven Soul elites being killed with a single strike. Most importantly, There was an exorbitant number of these black figures. More than 1,000 of them had charged out in unison, and most of them had charged toward Tian Qingyue and the others. Why? This was because they had an advantage in numbers. Thus, they were naturally the bigger target. In reality, these black figures were extremely fair. In terms of ratio, the number of black figures attacking Ling Han and the others was the same as the number of black figures attacking Tian Qingyue and the others. They all had to face around 6 black figures. However, on Ling Han's side, they were all extremely powerful prodigies. Even bewitching Maiden Ro could crush Yin's soul cultivators, so she could still manage to hang on against the Earth Soul black figures. As long as Ling Han looked out for her, she could naturally hold her own against these opponents. In an instant, a dozen or so members of Tian Qingyue's team had already been killed. Moreover, this number was still steadily rising. It was no wonder that the elders had said that those who were more powerful wouldn't necessarily win. Truly, the destructive ability of these black figures was quite remarkable. Even as powerful as Tian Qingyue and the others were, it was still hard to say whether they could survive the relentless attacks of these freaks for 10 entire days. These black figures didn't experience fatigue, didn't experience pain, and didn't even die. Were such opponents not terrifying? Hurry! Enter the defensive formation. Tian Qingyue and the other monarch tiers hurriedly exclaimed. This was their best choice at the moment. One group rest, and the other group take responsibility for maintaining the defenses. We'll rotate after a while. We need to battle for 10 days, so everyone obey the commands. Otherwise it's your own life on the line. Those who possessed battle prowess above Earth Soul stepped forward to attack, easily shattering the black figures. However, these black figures continued to regather, and they were simply impossible to destroy. This posed a huge threat to their defenses. Fortunately, they had Tian Qingyue and the other monarch tiers to help them. With their help, their mortality rate instantly decreased. At the very least, no one was dying at this moment. Meanwhile, Ji Wuming chuckled coldly as he charged forward. Pang pang pang. One after another, several black figures were easily smashed apart. Ji Wuming then charged at Tian Qingyue and the others, drawing his severed passion sword without hesitation as he did so. With a slash, powerful sword Qi soared into the sky. Humph! Tian Qingyue and Xiaofan immediately stepped forward to block his strike. They each launched a powerful and domineering punch. Pang! Ji Wuming was instantly sent stumbling back. Even though his severed passion sword was indestructible, what use would it be if it couldn't strike its target? After all, Tian Qingyue and the other monarch tiers still possessed a stronger battle prowess. Thus, the result of this exchange was decided by their cultivation level. However, Ji Wuming didn't care about this. He continued to dance around, with his severed passion sword slashing down again and again. Xiu xiu xiu. Bursts of sword qi sliced through the air, surging toward his enemies. His goal was extremely evident. He wanted to disperse these people's defenses. The true killer wouldn't be him, but rather the black figures. Detestable! Tian Qingyue roared in fury. By teaming up with Xiaofan, he could completely suppress the might of Ji Wuming's attacks. He could send Ji Wuming flying before he had even neared them. However, they were only 2 people, so how could they block all of Ji Wuming's chaotic attacks? His attacks were extremely random and chaotic. In order to dodge his attacks, the other cultivators had no option but to disperse. By doing so, however, their defensive formation was immediately rendered useless. The black figures surged forward, instantly ripping several people to shreds. Blood sprayed through the air, and this was an extremely gruesome sight. Don't disperse! Don't disperse! Some of the cultivators hurriedly exclaimed. Upon seeing the fate awaiting those who dispersed, the fleeing cultivators immediately ran back, reforming the defensive formation. A smile spread across Ji Wuming's face, and he immediately slashed down with his severed passion sword again. A burst of sword qi that measured 9 meters tall and 2 meters wide immediately surged forth. However, the cultivators gritted their teeth and refused to flee. Boom! The burst of sword qi swept over, instantly causing blood to spray through the sky. At least a dozen or so people were directly crushed to death. After all, this was a celestial tool. If its might were truly unleashed, even ascending origin tier elites would be killed in an instant. Right now, only a portion of its power was being unleashed. Even so, it was still utterly terrifying. Was this something that dividing soul tier cultivators could block? Everyone was transfixed with shock. So, should they dodge or not? Either way, their fate would still be death. Attack him together, Zhu Huiyun cried. She immediately charged over. They had purposefully kicked Ling Han and Ji Wuming out of the alliance, and they had then angered them into signing a contract with a different tribe. Was their aim not to crush their opponent through advantage in numbers? Now, however, their advantage in number wasn't helping them at all. Facing the wave of black figures, they could only suffer a beating. If this continued, they would definitely collapse. Thus, while they were still great in number, they would work together to dispose of Ji Wuming and Ling Han. As long as one of them was killed, Tian Qingyue and the others simply needed to ensure their own safety until the end of the battle. That way, victory would ultimately belong to them. Die! The other cultivators were also burning with fury. They were either going to be killed by the black figures or Ji Wuming, so they might as well unleash their full power and take a gamble. If they succeeded in killing Ji Wuming, their perilous situation would naturally be alleviated. Their thirst for life allowed them to unleash an astonishing battle prowess. One after another, numerous treasures were summoned without hesitation. There were also decrees, and these were the simplest of treasures. At this moment, the sky was drowned out by celestial light. The might of these cultivators' attacks was simply astounding. Meanwhile, the 4 supreme monarch tiers also joined hands to attack Ji Wuming. As for the black figures, they were left to the other few monarch tiers. In addition to them, a dozen or so heaven soul cultivators were also battling against the black figures. Right now, they were all working together to kill Ji Wuming. Have you forgotten about me? Ling Han roared. He unleashed his 9 heavens flame divided soul, and he furiously charged forward with divine demon sword in hand. Pang pang pang. Like a lion charging into a flock of sheep, he instantly sent everyone around him flying. Some of them were in one piece, while some of them had already been reduced into shattered flesh and blood. We can't allow them to work together. Zhu Huiyun shrieked. Not only had the 4 monarch tiers witnessed the combined power of Ling Han and Ji Wuming before, but they had even faced their insurmountable might. One of them possessed unparalleled defenses, while the other possessed unrivaled attacks. If they teamed up, they could easily destroy everyone at the same cultivation level. Tian Qingyue and Xia Hotong immediately summoned 4 divided souls each, sending them over to block Ling Han. With them using 8 divided souls to attack Ling Han, it was clear that they held him in extremely high regard. Heh! Without any hesitation, Ling Han immediately unleashed a great clash of source powers. Pang pang pang. The 8 divided souls were all sent flying. They were nowhere near as powerful as their owners. If one wanted their divided souls to be as powerful as themselves, they would need to absorb Celestial King tier divided souls while they were dividing their souls. For example, absorbing a source power of heaven and earth. Otherwise, they would need to be like Ji Wuming. That was, they needed to be a Celestial King in their past life. If they couldn't achieve this, it was simply impossible for their divided souls to be as powerful as themselves. Chapter 2070. Gaochen Bloodline. Ling Han's great clash of source powers was an area of effect attack. Regardless of how many people charged at him, each one of them would have to face the power of this attack. Thus, if one dividing soul tier cultivator couldn't withstand his attack, then 8 dividing soul tier cultivators couldn't face it, either. He charged over with ferocity, and his formidable physique allowed him to ignore all attacks. He quickly arrived beside Ji Wuming. Same rules as before, Ji Wuming said with a grin. Ling Han nodded in reply. Their cooperation had been great last time, and this time they hoped to achieve even better results. No matter what it took, they had to slay Tian Qingyue and the other monarch tiers. No. Battle, battle, battle. The surroundings instantly became chaotic as Ling Han, Ji Wuming, and the 4 monarch tiers clashed. Meanwhile, the other cultivators were all fighting against the black figures. Of course, these black figures also attacked Ling Han and the others. They wouldn't ignore them simply because they were battling against each other. This didn't affect Ling Han and Ji Wuming at all. After all, these were merely attacks at Earth Soul. Even if Ling Han lay down to accept their attacks, they wouldn't be able to kill him even if they attacked him for an entire epoch. Under his protection, Ji Wuming naturally didn't need to worry about his defenses. He could simply attack at will. However, Tian Qingyue and the others weren't so relaxed. Even if Earth Soul cultivators were unable to rival them, the four still had to divide some attention to defend against them. Regardless of whether it was a punch or a palm strike, they had to do something about these black figures. This caused them to suffer a disadvantage. It could be said that this was the straw that broke the camel's back. The four monarch tiers started to flee in disarray. With them gone, however, how could the Heaven Soul cultivators block the might of a celestial tool? Many died, and many fled. Meanwhile, the black figures continued to mercilessly massacre the battling cultivators. The number of survivors became fewer and fewer. "I'll obliterate your A**s," Hunyo roared as she brandished her iron staff and charged at the survivors. She was extremely cunning, and she only targeted those she could suppress. She thrust her staff forward, immediately eliciting a harrowing wail. A man was brutally flicked up, and the tip of the staff had already pierced into his bottom. Sanguine red blood dripped to the ground. "Xiaofan!" Hunyo exclaimed as she brandished her staff. The staff and man swept around in a flurry. Pang pang pang. She activated her rock bloodline, causing the projection of a gigantic rock to materialize behind her. This allowed her to gain terrifying power. One had to realize that even though she wasn't as freakish as Ji Wuming, she still had some power of a ninth heaven celestial king. It was just that this power was engraved in her divine sense through the form of a celestial king engraving. She needed to become familiar with this engraving if she wanted to channel its power. Anyhow, her battle prowess was incredible, especially after she activated her rock bloodline. "Die!" she roared in ferocity. The Empress expression was also ice-cold as she summoned her divided soul and her 18 clones. All 20 of the Empresses were breathtakingly beautiful. However, when they attacked, they didn't show any mercy at all. She started to massacre her enemies, and those under Heaven's Soul were all killed in a flash. Only bewitching Maiden Ro was far weaker than them. She struggled even against the black figures, so how could she have the spare time to deal with anyone else? She could only support Hunyo and the Empress with her gaze. Elsewhere, Ling Han and Ji Wuming also started to hunt their opponents. This was a sealed canyon, and before the time limit of 10 days was up, no one could hope to exit. Moreover, this was the first time that any of them had entered, so it was only natural that no one had laid any traps. "Hunyo Luan Xing," Ling Han called. He drew the two women into the Black Tower. He then looked at the pitiful bewitching Maiden Ro, and also drew her into the Black Tower with a wave of his right hand. They were going to hunt their enemies, so the first thing to do was to ensure that they had no weaknesses. If the three women remained, what would he do if they were captured as hostages? Ling Han and Ji Wuming activated their movement techniques as they pursued Xiaofan. "Those hunted by me, Ji Wuming. Can they hope to escape?" Ji Wuming said with a cold chuckle as he gave chase. He retrieved that small bow. Celestial tool, Minor Heaven's complete bow. He didn't notch an arrow, and he simply drew the bow. The Minor Heaven's complete bow instantly expanded several-fold, becoming as tall as a person. A streak of light materialized on the bow, condensing into an arrow of light. "Go!" Ji Wuming roared. Whoosh! The arrow immediately pierced forth, shooting towards Xiaofan. If he had been able to unleash the full might of the celestial tool, Xiaofan would have definitely been killed even if he had been 10,000 times more powerful. However, even until now, Ji Wuming was still unable to unleash the full might of celestial tools. This arrow merely carried the might of divine metal. Even so, this arrow of light was still absolutely terrifying. It transformed into a streak of light as it raced towards Xiaofan. "It's too fast!" Xiaofan roared in fury, yet it was already too late for him to dodge. He had two choices: to parry the arrow, or face it head-on. However, he definitely didn't dare to face this arrow head-on. Even though he hadn't turned around yet, he could already feel an ice-cold aura that caused him to involuntarily tremble. If he were struck by this arrow, he would definitely be killed in an instant. He hurriedly turned around to throw a punch. His fist was enveloped in a thick layer of light, and there were also countless symbols that continued to pulsate and flash. Pang! His fist struck the arrow. At this instant, the great Tao collided, and sparks chaotically flew. One could clearly see the devastating power of the arrow. It annihilated the layer of light enveloping Xiahotong's fist, and it was as if his defenses were completely useless. However, Xiahotong was a paramount monarch tier, after all. If he hadn't been confident, would he have thrown this punch? When the arrow was just about to strike his fist, it suddenly disintegrated into sparks of light before vanishing without a trace. To block the attack of a celestial tool, even an incompletely awakened celestial tool, Xiahotong's strength was indeed astonishing. However, this was still completely useless. Ji Wuming calmly drew his bow again. Whoosh! Another arrow of light whizzed forth. Would Xiahotong block this attack? He had no choice but to do so. However, so what if he could block this attack? Ji Wuming would simply draw his bow again. Arrow after arrow, Ji Wuming's attacks were relentless and fierce. Meanwhile, Ling Han had already caught up. Do you insist on killing me? Xiahotong roared in a shrill voice. Ling Han couldn't help but chuckle and say, I'm pretty sure that it was you people who insisted on killing us. Why are you suddenly complaining now? Humph! You're underestimating me, Xiahotong said with killing intent. Boom! A powerful aura suddenly erupted from him, and the projection of a ferocious beast rose from within him. Wang! There were 7 symbols of the Great Tao on this ferocious beast, yet each of these symbols was damaged and incomplete. Even so, this beast still radiated with a primordial and dignified aura. It was as if this were a source beast that had come from mythical times. The head of this ferocious beast was like a deer, with a pair of horns protruding from its forehead. Its body was filled with scales, and it also had the tail of a cow. Ha! Gaochen! Ji Wuming exclaimed in surprise. Ling Han instantly replied with an "oh" upon hearing this. This was an ancient source beast, and it was one of the most powerful source beasts as well. Xiahotong said with pride. Black scales started to materialize on his face, neck, and hands. At this moment, Xiahotong didn't seem like a human at all. Instead, he looked like a genuine ancient immortal beast. It's a shame that you don't know. The Gaochen was slain by me, Ji Wuming said in a calm voice. Chapter 2071. Unleashing Everything. What? Xiahotong almost choked upon hearing this. Ji Wuming had slain his clan's ancestor. In reality, the Xiaohou clan was a distant descendant of the Gaochen, and it was only in Xiahotong's case that the bloodline had suddenly reverted to its ancient roots. Add to that his astounding cultivation talent, and he was ultimately able to become a paramount monarch tier. Xiahotong had naturally never seen the Gaochen before. However, he was well aware that his ancient ancestor had been one of the most powerful beings in the world. The Gaochen was a 9th heaven celestial king. Now, however, a measly dividing soul tier cultivator was shamelessly claiming that he had slain his ancient ancestor. Just what kind of joke was this? However, these words had been spoken by Ji Wuming, so no one dared to treat it as a joke. This was the strength and charisma of Ji Wuming. You. Who in the world are you? Xiahotong asked in a solemn voice. He carefully observed himself, and to his utter shock, he discovered that his Gaochen power was actually yielding to Ji Wuming. This was the mysterious power of heaven and earth. For example, if 2 powerful source beasts battled, leading to the death of one, the descendants of the defeated party would suffer natural suppression from the descendants of the victorious party. This was a form of fate. Source beasts were born from the mandate of heaven, so when they were killed, heaven and earth would also shift their power of fate elsewhere. Of course, elites could overcome this kind of suppression. They could defy the heavens and change their fate. However, Xiahotong discovered that before Ji Wuming, his Gaochen power was much like a mouse before a cat. He was completely suppressed, and his Gaochen power trembled in apprehension. This was the suppression from the heavenly fate. Moreover, this wasn't suppression from the victor's descendants. Instead, it was suppression from his ancestor's slayer. How can a dividing soul tier cultivator kill a ninth heaven celestial king? Isn't this a joke? Xiahotong couldn't help but voice his doubt. Ji Wuming smiled and said, "Back then, when the storm of darkness descended, the Gaochen refused to come forward and join the battle. In a fit of anger, I stormed over and killed him. By doing so, I was finally able to stabilize the morale of the army. Otherwise, that storm of darkness might have already overcome us. Who would have thought? After reincarnating, I'm about to kill another descendant of the Gaochen." These words carried an astonishing amount of information. The arrival of the storm of darkness had actually required ninth heaven celestial kings to mobilize. Moreover, several ninth heaven celestial kings had needed to come together to resist it. In fact, even such elites had faced perilous danger, so much so that the Gaochen had shirked battle. Ji Wuming had then executed the Gaochen before the army to raise their morale. Could the Gaochen have willingly accepted death? This was naturally impossible. He had definitely resisted with all his might. Even so, he had still been slain. Just how powerful had Ji Wuming been? The Gaochen was a source beast, and it was more so one of the most powerful source beasts. Yet, it had still been killed by Ji Wuming. At that time, just how overwhelmingly powerful had Ji Wuming been? Ninth Heaven Celestial King. Xiahotong stammered. He almost wet his pants in fright. Even though he was confident that he could definitely become a fifth heaven celestial king, any progress above that would completely be up to his luck and fate. Progressing any further wasn't something that could be accomplished simply through talent and hard work. Ninth heaven celestial king. He only dared to dream about this. However, so what if he became a ninth heaven celestial king? Even his ancient ancestor had been slain by this person. Such kind of reincarnated celestial king. Who in the world could rival them? No wonder he had aroused the most venerable divine path. During his past life, Ji Wuming had definitely been one of the most powerful ninth heaven celestial kings. He had been a genuine paragon of the celestial realm. Then, what about Ling Han? Xiahotong involuntarily looked toward Ling Han. This person had also triggered the most venerable divine path. "I'm certainly no reincarnated celestial king," Ling Han said with a smile. Since Ji Wuming was in no hurry to attack, he naturally wasn't in a hurry, either. In any case, he was still pondering the storm of darkness at this moment. Just what kind of calamity had that been? It had actually forced so many celestial kings to band together to fight against. Moreover, they had seemingly failed to comprehensively deal with it. So Ling Han isn't a reincarnated celestial king. Xiahotong breathed a sigh of relief even though this couldn't change the current situation. Ji Wuming smiled and said, "He isn't a reincarnated celestial king, but he's the successor of a heavenly venerate. Heavenly venerates are the next major tier up from ninth heaven celestial kings. They're the true paragons and rulers of the world." Pooh! Xiahotong's eyes bulged in shock and disbelief. What? There are even more powerful beings above ninth heaven celestial kings. Most venerable divine path. Perhaps, only those who have the potential to become a heavenly venerate can trigger this dragon bridge. Xiao! Ji Wuming suddenly lashed out while Xiahotong was still stuck in a daze. His sword flashed, and Xiahotong's head instantly flew into the sky. His lifeless eyes were filled with confusion and disbelief as he stared at Ji Wuming. "You're a reincarnated ninth heaven celestial king. How can you be so lowly and shameless? How can you launch such a sneak attack against a junior?" However, he had been beheaded by a celestial tool, so how could he possibly survive? Not to mention him, even ascending origin tier elites couldn't possibly survive such an attack. Even though Xiahotong's Gaochen power had been suppressed by Ji Wuming, he had still possessed the power of a paramount monarch tier. Thus, as long as he dispelled his Gaochen power, he could have definitely rivaled Ji Wuming and Ling Han. However, he had been stunned by Ji Wuming's words. In his moment of shock, he had then been swiftly killed by his opponent. He had indeed died a miserable and vexing death. Ling Han glanced at Ji Wuming. This person was willing to do anything to achieve his aims. He had purposefully mentioned the Gaochen, and he had then purposefully revealed a shocking piece of information. His aim for doing so was simply to stun Xiahou Tong, at which time he could easily kill him. Brutal, decisive, merciless, and completely shameless. Anyone would struggle against such an opponent. Ji Wuming turned around to glance at Ling Han, saying, "Rest assured, if I want to kill you, I'll do so fair and square." "Oh, really?" Ling Han shook his head in his mind. Right now, he didn't believe a single word coming out of Ji Wuming's mouth. This person was far too strange. Sometimes his trust in others would seem blind and misplaced. For example, when cooperating with Ling Han, he had completely handed him his back. He hadn't worried about Ling Han seizing the opportunity to stab him in the back. Just then, however, he had clearly possessed the advantage, yet he had still used such an underhanded method. One could only say that he would do anything to achieve his aims. He was ruthless and ambitious. Ji Wuming turned around and said, "Continue." They had only killed a single paramount monarch tier. There were still 3 remaining. Regardless of how Tian Qingyue and the others fled, since this battle had begun, it would last for 10 days before any of them could leave. Moreover, the canyon was only so big, so where could they hide? Ling Han and Ji Wuming started to scour the canyon. They only had to find the 3 supreme monarch tiers. The remaining cultivators were mediocre, so most of them would be killed by the black figures. The 2 of them strolled through the canyon. Even though the black figures pursued and attacked them, these attacks were completely useless against them. They could annihilate the black figures with a simple wave of their hand. After an hour or so, they found Zhu Huiyun standing atop a large boulder. As the mountainous wind swept past, her dress gently fluttered in the air, making her appear like a celestial maiden. She directly faced Ling Han and Ji Wuming just like that. It was as if she were going to fight them to the death here. Ling Han swept his gaze across the surroundings. There was nothing but empty space beside this boulder, so it was impossible for anyone to be hiding. However, the boulder beneath Zhu Huiyun was truly very large. It was definitely large enough for people to hide behind. This was a place that the naked eye couldn't see. However, this didn't matter. Ling Han unleashed his divine sense, which could act as his eyes. He didn't see any abnormalities. However, it made absolutely no sense for Zhu Huiyun to stand here and wait for them. Ji Wuming strode forward and said, "Just kill her." He seemingly didn't care even if a dragon's lair lay before them. This moon was as limpid and cool as water, and there was an incomplete ancient character on its body. This character instantly lit up, causing the radiance of the moon to become even more brilliant. When the moonlight struck Ji Wuming, his body immediately froze, and he was unable to move anymore. Purple Blade Divine Sword. Zhu Huiyun roared. She also unleashed her trump card, drawing a purple divine sword from the crown of her head. This wasn't a true celestial tool, but rather a divine sword that had been formed from her divine sense. Chapter 2073. 9 Lights Ancient Buddha. Their attacks had been ineffective. Tian Qingyue and the others could barely believe their eyes. They had all unleashed their full power, and they had even unleashed their ultimate trump cards. These were trump cards that had raised their battle prowess tenfold. Ji Golden Physique Buddha. This is the secret technique of the 9 Lights Ancient Buddha. The 3 monarch tiers were filled with shock and disbelief as they stared at Ji Wuming. "You're the successor of the Buddhist sect," they exclaimed in unison. The 9 Lights Ancient Buddha was a legendary being. He had been an invincible celestial king, and he had founded the Buddhist sect, which had the core purpose of enlightening all beings and teaching them to embrace good. According to legends, This celestial king had possessed great benevolence, yet he could also transform into a demon out of rage. He had even slain ninth heaven celestial kings before. Thus, the Buddhist sect was extremely powerful, and it was ranked highly among the ninth heaven celestial king tier forces. If Ji Wuming were from the Buddhist sect, his identity would be far too astonishing. If someone dared to kill him, would they not be afraid of revenge from the Buddhist sect? According to rumors, the Nine Lights ancient Buddha had vanished long ago. However, who would believe that such a powerful celestial king had died just like that? It was widely believed that he was cultivating in seclusion. If he reappeared in the celestial realm, his battle prowess would definitely be even greater than before. To say nothing of the Nine Lights ancient Buddha, 2 of his 3 disciples had also become ninth heaven celestial kings. Meanwhile, the other had become an 8th heaven celestial king. Just these 3 disciples alone were already powerful enough to frighten people to death. An uncanny smile spread across Ji Wuming's face. Successor of the Buddhist sect. The entire Buddhist sect had been created by him, and it was only because he had fought against the storm of darkness for too long that his personality had undergone huge changes. It was because of this that he had abandoned his almost invincible body and abandoned his will of enlightening all beings. It was also because of this that he had chosen to reincarnate and recultivate. However, he didn't need to explain this to these juniors. So what if you're the successor of the Buddhist sect? Dang! Tian Qingyue roared in a cold voice. They had already come to this, so things could only end with the death of one party. In any case, after entering this ancient site, life and death were one's own responsibility. This was a tradition, so the Buddhist sect had to honor it no matter how powerful they were. No. Die! Zhu Huiyun and Yu Huaqing also wore cold expressions as they stepped forward. It was either Ji Wuming die or they die. Meanwhile, Ji Wuming continued to recite Buddhist mantras, with the symbol on his forehead becoming increasingly radiant. Layers of golden light enveloped him, and it was as if he were a golden fetus. Pang pang pang. Any attack targeting him was rendered useless. They were completely unable to breach his defenses. The 3 monarch tiers became extremely panicked. Time was flying past, yet they were still unable to shatter Ji Wuming's defenses even though they had already unleashed their most powerful attacks. They felt as if they were facing Ling Han. Regardless of how hard they tried, their efforts were all in vain. Crack! At this moment, they suddenly heard a loud cracking sound. A huge hole had been smashed into the treasured tranquility vial, from which Ling Han's figure strode out. I didn't miss anything, did I? He asked with a smile. Just on time, Ji Wuming said calmly. He retracted his golden physique. Tian Qingyue and the others all wore grim expressions. They had initially thought that removing Ling Han from the battle would give them the chance to kill Ji Wuming. However, upon executing their plan, they discovered that Ji Wuming was no weaker than Ling Han if he fully focused on his defenses. This was a despair-inducing discovery. Now it's your turn, Ji Wuming said with a wide grin. There was clearly a symbol glowing on his head, and he was clearly enveloped in golden light, making him appear like a Buddha. However, with his severed passion sword in hand, he was now as merciless as a demon. He resolutely charged forward, with his sword severing the clouds and splitting the sky as it slashed forth. Ling Han followed behind him, not unleashing any attacks. He was simply responsible for defending. This time, the 3 monarch tiers didn't attempt to flee. This place was only so large, so instead of separating and getting picked off one by one, they might as well work together and take a gamble. As long as they held on for 10 days, they would be able to leave this ancient site. Boom, boom, boom. The 5 monarch tiers became engaged in an intense battle. Ling Han's and Ji Wuming's battle prowess was clearly inferior, yet they were still able to suppress Tian Qingyue and the others. This was an uncanny sight. Meanwhile, the black figures continued to join in on the fun. Even though they were only at Earth Soul, they were still able to become an increasing headache for Tian Qingyue and the others because of their undying nature. More importantly, the black figures were still growing in number. What did this represent? The outsiders had been massacred in great numbers, freeing the black figures up and allowing them to charge over. Tian Qingyue and the others gritted their teeth as they resisted. Their only hope at survival was to hold on for 10 days. Judging by the current situation, however, this would be incredibly difficult. 1 day, 3 days, 7 days. Sure enough, the three of them were all Supreme Monarch tiers. Unleashing their full power to defend, they actually managed to hold on for 7 days without collapsing. However, they were about to reach their limit. They were all riddled with wounds, and this greatly affected their battle prowess. If it weren't for their strong willpower, they would have already been rendered immobile and helpless by their severe wounds. Ah! Yu Huaqing was the first to shriek in agony. He was hacked to death by Ji Wuming. Tian Qingyue and Zhu Huiyun both wore grave expressions. They could already envision their own wretched fates. However, there was already no path to retreat. Their only choice was to battle. Half a day passed, and Tian Qingyue wailed in misery as he was killed by Ji Wuming's Minor Heaven's complete bow. Only Zhu Huiyun remained. Ling Han was merciless, and Ji Wuming more so didn't understand the concept of compassion. The two powerful monarch tiers worked together, and in half a day, Zhu Huiyun's beautiful head was removed from her body. Ji Wuming channeled his cultivation technique and engulfed the corpses of the three monarch tiers. Meanwhile, Ling Han collected their spatial rings. There was no reason not to collect these spoils. They returned to the center of the canyon, only to see that there were only 4 people remaining. Among them were Du Xiaojun and Long But Ian. Killing intent flashed across Ji Wuming's eyes, and he was just about to kill them with his bow. However, Ling Han raised his hand and said, "That's enough, we've already won." Ji Wuming's eyes were filled with killing intent as he turned around to gaze at Ling Han, and it was as if he were about to redirect this killing intent at him. Only after a short moment did he retract his gaze. He waved his hands and turned around to leave. "Thank you, Brother Ling," Du Xiaojun shouted from the distance. He was stuck in a perilous situation, being surrounded and attacked by over 200 black figures. If Ji Wuming had targeted him just then, he would have definitely been killed. Ling Han nodded in acknowledgement. He then released the Empress and the others from the Black Tower. At this moment, Du Xiaojun, Long But Ian, and the others naturally didn't dare to dream about victory. Indeed, they would be filled with happiness as long as they could survive this battle. Right now, they were all gathered in one place, with over 1,000 black figures surrounding and attacking them. Of course, 200 or so of them were on Ling Han's side, so they naturally wouldn't attack Ling Han and his companions. However, Du Xiaojun and the others had to face attacks from all of the black figures. Ling Han offered a helping hand, helping them break free from numerous deadly situations. This caused Du Xiaojun and the others to feel indescribably grateful. This was especially the case with Long But Ian. He had initially thought that his battle prowess was superior to Ling Han's, yet at this moment, he finally discovered that Ling Han had barely unleashed any of his power during their battle. Otherwise, he would have been killed within 100 strikes. 3 days passed, and the Battle of the Tribes finally drew to a close. At this moment, a colorful and dazzling bead suddenly descended from the sky. You're tuning in to the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.